Chapter 495. Even if it was a battle between cultivators, they would usually go through hundreds or even thousands of moves. Only when both parties were exhausted would the victor be decided. It was naturally the same for cultivators. Unless there was a gap in cultivation level, even Chen Shi, who was at the peak of divine transformation realm, could not take Yuhuan Tianzuan's life in 2 or 3 moves. Why was Tiandu able to withstand Chen Shi's attacks repeatedly? It was because they had gathered the strength of everyone on the ship. Several thousand immortal cultivators above the gold core stage were using the cosmic stars formation as a medium to gather everyone in the formation. Everyone was bound together for good or ill, and everyone was bound together for good or ill. Let's give a simple example. If Chen Shi's attack was compared to a flood, then the people of Tiandu were a dam. The dam was eroded bit by the flood. When the dam could no longer withstand the impact of the flood, the entire dam would immediately collapse and completely disappear in the torrential flood. Then there was a problem. Tiandu had gathered everyone's strength, but they could only barely hold on for a while. How could this Tuoba Yi, who was only at the middle stage of divine transformation realm, be able to withstand Chen Shi's sword attack without suffering any injuries? How could there be nothing fishy about it? Chen Shi immediately understood why Tuoba Yi could withstand his sword attack. The reason was very simple. Because there was an expert helping him in secret. The folding fan was Taoist Master Chongshu's natal magic treasure. Taoist Master Chongshu himself was a supreme existence. He could freely travel through the void like Chen Shi. Because he had been hiding in the void and was not in the main plane, even Chen Shi could not discover his existence immediately. Taoist Master Chongshu? After hearing Tuoba Ye's words, Chen Shi could not help but frown slightly and asked coldly, "You are not a member of Tuoba family?" Hearing this, Taoist Master Chongshu chuckled. The smile on his face was just like the spring breeze, which formed a sharp contrast with the indifference on Chen Shi's face. "My name is Master Chongshu. I am the sect master of Jade Clear Grotto Heaven." Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? Chen Shi had long heard of this name from Chonghua. Therefore, after hearing the old man's self-introduction, Chen Shi immediately understood everything. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven should be the strongest force in the Supreme Palace enclosure, right? With the current strength of the Tuoba family, even with the addition of Tiandu, they simply could not withstand the fury of Chen Shi. Tuoba Yi was very smart, but he was also very greedy. Just like Tobagwe, this was human nature. The moment Tuoba Yi received the news, he began to repeatedly weigh the gains and losses. As he thought about it, he finally couldn't resist the temptation and made the same choice as Tobagwe. Benefits always coexist with risks. If the ownership of Tiandu was viewed as a benefit, then Chen Shi was the greatest risk. Just like doing business, in order to ensure that the Tuoba family would not go for wool and come back shorn, Tuoba Yi made up his mind and took the initiative to find Immortal Chongshu, hoping to share the risk of the Tuoba family and obtain benefits in a more secure way. One had to know that immortal cultivators were all people who would not rise early without benefits. Therefore, although Reverend Chongshu appeared to be kind and harmless, he might have secretly done a lot of atrocious and inhumane things. Jade Clear Grotto Heaven? Why did Immortal Chongshu come here? Wasn't it because he wanted to get a share of the profits? Therefore, Chen Shi was too lazy to talk nonsense with him. With a clench of his right hand, the divine sword Dharma idol appeared in his hand again. "Get out of the way. Since you and I are at the same level, you should know that you can't stop me. It's not easy for me to kill you, but killing him is like killing a chicken." Before his voice fell, Chen Shi turned into a stream of light and disappeared in front of Immortal Chongshu. At this time, Tuoba Yi on the side did not even have any reaction. The divine sword Dharma idol suddenly appeared from the void and then slashed down at him. Didn't Tuoba Yi feel very proud of taking Chen Shi's sword head-on just now? Therefore, Chen Shi wanted to see if Tuoba Yi could still be proud now. A cold light flashed, and Tuoba Yi suddenly opened his eyes wide with an expression of disbelief on his face. He never thought that Chen Shi actually attacked him so abruptly in front of Taoist Master Void Pierce. This sword strike was simply too fast. It was like teleportation. With the flash of the sword light, An extremely fine wound appeared between Tuoba Ye's eyebrows. And this was obviously the true power of the Moonlight Sword technique. The first move of the Moonlight Sword technique, a sword hiding in the void. This sudden turn of events caused Taoist Master Void Pierce to be stunned on the spot. Everyone was at the insightful Void realm. Who could be faster than the other? Therefore, in the situation where Qin Shi had the upper hand, Immortal Chongshu had no time to rescue him. Arrogant. Arrogant to the extreme. I'm so angry. Reverend Chongshu let out a long whistle. The folding fan in his hand suddenly flew out like a sharp flying disc, following closely behind Qin Shi. Seeing this, Qin Shi smiled coldly and escaped into the void again. Insightful emptiness. Insight into the void, traversing freely. From the beginning to the end, Qin Shi had no intention of fighting with Immortal Chongshu. Did he really think that he could scare him by using an insightful emptiness? What a joke. Everyone was at the insightful emptiness, who could do anything to who. Qin Shi couldn't kill Immortal Chongshu, just like how Immortal Chongshu couldn't kill him. But, although Qin Shi could not do anything to Reverend Chongsu, he could completely abandon Reverend Chongsu and turn his attention to heavenly venerable Yu Huan and the rest. Therefore, after Immortal Chongshu made his move, Qin Shi didn't pay attention to him at all. Instead, he went near Xingcha again and continued his forceful demolition. Peng! Peng! Qin Shi flew in front with his long sword, while Immortal Chongshu chased behind with his fan. The two of them started a game of "You Chase Me" around Xingcha. However, the long sword in Qin Shi's hand didn't stop for a moment. As he continued to attack, the casualties of Tiandu also increased. In the end, almost no gold core realm cultivator could still stand on the ship. It's over, the great formation is about to break. Quickly support. As the saying goes, no egg can remain intact when the nest is overturned. Seeing that the situation was so critical, several celestial venerables no longer cared about preserving their strength. They had to jump into the eye of the formation and forcibly prolong the life of the tottering heavenly cycle star formation. But at this moment, Tebugaway, who had been steering the ship, suddenly exclaimed, "Venerable! We have arrived at Supreme Palace enclosure." Hearing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately came to his side. After looking down at the land below, Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes flashed with a trace of sternness, and he ordered coldly, "Continue flying, don't stop." Tebugaway seemed to not understand what he meant. Continue flying? Flight aware? They had already arrived at Supreme Palace enclosure, why didn't they scatter and flee? Anyway, no matter how strong Qin Shi was, he was only one person. As long as everyone ran separately, could he really catch them one by one? Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't have the slightest intention of explaining. Instead, he seemed to suddenly think of something and suddenly asked, "Where is Jade Clear Grotto Heaven?" "In Central State." "Then go to Central State quick." Chapter 496. The Middle State was located in the middle of the Supreme Palace enclosure. There were many mountains in the territory, and one of them was the most well-known, the Heavenly Yu Mountain. The Heavenly Yu Mountain stretched for hundreds of miles. There were many rivers at the foot of the mountain and many cliffs at the top. It could be said that the mountain was high and the river was dangerous. In addition, the mountain was shrouded in clouds all year round. The spiritual energy in the mountain was far superior to the outside world. Therefore, it was also called the first paradise of the Supreme Palace enclosure. The name of the Jade Clear Paradise came from this. On this day, many disciples of the Jade Clear Paradise were carrying out their daily cultivation in the square. Suddenly, a dilapidated large Xingcha appeared in the clouds of the distant mountain. The disciples looked up and saw that the Xingcha seemed to have entered an uninhabited land. After breaking through the mountain gates formation, it directly landed in the square. Boom! With a loud sound, the dilapidated Xingcha finally completed its final mission and turned into a pile of debris in the martial arts practice field. Who is it? Who dares to break into the Jade Clear Paradise and destroy our mountain gate? Disciples, listen to my order. Take them down. Under the command of the Elder of Imparting Arts, all the disciples stepped forward, ready to capture all the people on the ship. But at this moment, a few loud sounds suddenly came from afar. At the same time, it was accompanied by an extremely strong wave of true essence. The strength of the two sides was so strong that even Elder Chuan, who had already stepped into the Yuanying realm, could not help but be frightened to the point of losing his sense of propriety. He did not even have time to order the disciples to immediately return to the main hall. A sword light suddenly fell from the sky and directly hit the wreckage of the Xingcha in the middle of the martial arts practice field. Bang! At that moment, Elder Chuan's eyes widened and his eyes were about to burst. However, he could only watch helplessly as a burst of powerful true essence suddenly erupted on the martial arts practice field. It was like throwing a grenade in the middle of a busy street. The shockwaves from the explosion immediately shook all the disciples and made them vomit blood. Everyone was instantly sent flying dozens of meters away. Elder Chuan stared blankly at the center of the martial arts practice field. He saw a large formation slowly rising from the wreckage of the Xingcha. It seemed to be defending against external attacks. What was going on? This sudden turn of events caused Elder Gong Chuan to lose his composure. At this moment, a loud and resounding bell sound came from the jade clear grotto heaven. It was a warning bell. It meant that there was an enemy attack. The moment the bell rang, 3 figures flew out of jade clear grotto heaven. After a short meeting, the 3 of them turned into streams of light and completely disappeared from the technique imparting elder's sight. This is Tongxian, Nanhua, and Dongling? Elder technique imparting elder was completely stunned. Profound enlightening, Nanhua, Dongling. If a void peer stage expert was included, then the 4 great reverends of the jade clear heavenly grotto heaven would be gathered. The 3 ancestors had been in seclusion for many years and had long stopped caring about worldly affairs. His sudden appearance today meant that the jade clear grotto heaven was about to face a great calamity. Thinking of this, Elder Gong Chuan suddenly felt a chill in his heart. Therefore, he no longer cared about Xingcha's remains in the middle of the drill ground. Instead, he led the group of disciples and quickly returned to the main hall. Wasn't Yuhuan Tianzuan and his group on the Xingcha ship that suddenly fell into the jade clear grotto heaven? Under Qin Shi's continuous attacks, the damage to Tiandu was getting heavier and heavier. Seeing that the jade clear grotto heaven was right in front of him, Yuhuan Tianzuan gritted his teeth and ordered everyone to withdraw the grand formation to reduce the pressure that they had to bear. The result of doing so was obvious. After losing the protection of the grand formation, Xingcha, which was already badly damaged, was immediately shot down by Qin Shi and smashed into the drill ground of the jade clear grotto heaven. It finally stopped. Presumably, it would also stop here forever in the future. Venerables, Xingcha has been destroyed. What should we do next? Tobague stood beside Yuhuan Tianzuan with a terrified expression. One should know that just now, he saw with his own eyes that Tuoba Yi was struck by Qin Shi's sword. With Tuoba Ye's mid-divine transformation realm cultivation base, it should be impossible for him to die so easily. However, with Qin Shi's cultivation base, this sword would at least cause irreparable damage to Tuoba Yi. Therefore, when he thought that Qin Shi didn't even give face to Taoist Master Void Peer Stage and was determined to kill them today, Tobague was so scared that he almost couldn't stand still. If he had known that this matter would become so big, even if he was beaten to death, he would never take half a step into the heaven's pivot ruins. At this point, the third party, including Taoist Master Void Peer Stage, had reached the point where they couldn't back down. Yuan Tianzuan wanted to run. Qin Shi wanted to chase after him. Taoist Master Void Peer Stage wanted to stop him. If Yuan Tianzuan didn't run, Qin Shi would kill him. If Qin Shi didn't kill him, how could the Heart Demon Oath be fulfilled? As the third party, if Taoist Master Void Peer Stage couldn't stop Qin Shi, where should he put his old face? Due to the above reasons, today's matter was destined to be difficult to resolve. After hearing Tobague's question, Yuan Tianzuan didn't answer for a long time. His face was gloomy, and no one knew what he was thinking. Venerable? Venerable? Seeing that Yuan Tianzuan didn't answer, Tobague had to be like an ant on a hot pan, anxiously pacing around the array. Losing Xingxia meant that they lost the ability to move. Although the array hadn't been broken yet, how long could it last? Were they really going to sit here and wait for death? Tobague was annoyed. If it weren't for the fear that Yuhuan Tianzuan might suddenly turn hostile, he would have already fled. Just as Tobague was anxious, a dazzling light suddenly bloomed in the distant sky. Immediately afterward, 5 figures appeared out of thin air in the huge martial arts field. It was Qin Shi and the 4 Taoist masters. They saw. Qin Shi stood alone in the middle of the martial arts field, facing the remains of Xingxia. The 4 Taoist masters stood in the 4 corners of the martial arts field, trying to trap Qin Shi. Although Qin Shi was surrounded by the 4 Taoist masters, there was no panic on his face. Instead, there was a faint smile on his face. Like a hunter who was preparing to capture his prey from a trap, even if he was surrounded, Qin Shi's attention wasn't on the 4 Taoist masters at all. Instead, it was focused on Yuhuan Tianzuan. Qin Shi and Yuhuan Tianzuan looked at each other across the air. He didn't make any move. After the 4 Taoist masters looked at each other, they had to forcibly suppress the idea of striking first. One had to know that this was a battle between Taoist masters. Although they had the advantage in numbers, if they really started fighting, it would take a while for them to end the battle. If Qin Shi was determined to fight here, wouldn't the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven be destroyed because of this? At that time, where would they go to cry? The 4 Taoist masters had scruples in their hearts, so they didn't dare to take the initiative to provoke him. The scene suddenly calmed down. Qin Shi just looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan quietly, without any emotional fluctuations in his eyes. If it was said that he was a bloodthirsty beast before, then he was now a bloodthirsty beast. Then at this moment, Qin Shi was a quiet pool of water, so calm that there wasn't a single ripple. And under Qin Shi's gaze, Yuhuan Tianzuan couldn't help but feel an inexplicable pressure in his heart. At that moment, Yuhuan Tianzuan felt like a monkey in a cage. He finally understood. He understood why Qin Shi was smiling. So, he couldn't help but shake his head and laugh like Qin Shi. But that smile, it obviously looked a little forced. Some choices, once made, can never be turned back. I think you should understand now, right? Qin Shi was the first to speak, breaking the silence. Suddenly, a cool breeze blew from the mountain range in the distance, causing the branches to rustle and sway. It made the martial arts practice ground look especially cold and cheerless. The scene in front of them was really out of everyone's expectations. Why did the 4 Taoist masters move together? Wasn't it because they were worried that Qin Shi might wreak havoc in this pure land of inheritance? But the result? When Qin Shi really forced Yuhuan Tianzuan into a desperate situation, he didn't seem to have any intention of immediately making a move. What was going on? Chapter 497. On the huge martial arts practice field, everyone was waiting for him. After Qin Shi broke the silence, a complicated expression appeared on Yuhuan Tianzuan's face. No one knew what he was really thinking, and no one could understand his complicated feelings. Yuhuan Tianzuan remained silent, as if he had no intention of responding. Seeing this, Qin Shi could not help but smile, and the divine sword Dharma idol appeared in his hand again. Still want to fight? Seeing Qin Shi take out his sword, the 4 perfected masters' expressions changed drastically. They immediately retreated to the direction of the main hall, afraid that the main hall would be destroyed by the battle. 2 Supremes and 2 Peak Soul Formation cultivators. This was the true strength of the 4 perfected masters, and also the reason why the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven could dominate the Supreme Palace enclosure. Even so, they did not want to continue fighting. Because Qin Shi was a supreme being. As long as a cultivator reached the insightful emptiness realm, their survival ability would skyrocket. Unless they could accurately find the threads of law that Qin Shi controlled, the 4 perfected masters would not be able to stop Qin Shi. The world was so big, where could he not go? Qin Shi was alone. Even if he turned the Supreme Palace enclosure upside down, it would have nothing to do with him. Since the 4 perfected masters were responsible for the inheritance of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven, how could they allow this land of inheritance to be affected by the flames of war? Therefore, even though Taoist Master Void Pierce had been brushed off by Qin Shi earlier, He had no choice but to restrain the thought of making a move at this moment. Instead, he persuaded Qin Shi with kind words. Fellow Taoist, listen to this old man. I've never heard of a supreme being in the Dubhe ruins. Since you've appeared, it means that you should be the owner of the Dubhe ruins. Now, you've chased after this group of people for thousands of miles. There must be a reason for this. There must be a reason to kill them. This is a matter of the Dubhe ruins. The Jade Clear Grotto Heaven should not be involved. But now, this matter has already affected the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, I can only represent the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven and be forced to talk to you. I only hope that fellow Taoist can understand. This is the Supreme Palace enclosure, not the Tian Shu ruins. Fellow Taoist, if you are willing to stop and make peace with my Supreme Palace enclosure, this old man is willing to be the middleman. I guarantee that I will give you a satisfactory answer, okay? After a long talk, Taoist Master Chongshu also made his attitude very clear. It was true that he was plotting against Tian Du, but he wasn't willing to involve Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. So as long as Qin Shi was willing to sit down and talk, he might be able to come up with a solution that would satisfy everyone. However, after hearing this, Qin Shi did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan with a playful expression and said slowly in a very calm tone, Yuhuan, do you know what your biggest problem is? That means he likes to act smart. To be honest, the existence of Tiandu means nothing to me. I remember that I once said that I would give you the appropriate treatment based on your performance. If you guys perform well, wouldn't I be less worried? At this point, Qin Shi suddenly shook his head and continued in a sigh, what a pity, what a pity. You are too arrogant. This kind of arrogance has been deeply rooted in your bones. You are the master of Tiandu, so you can't tolerate being a prisoner at all. No matter how good the conditions I give you, as long as there is a chance, you will still choose to be my enemy, am I right? Qin Shi's voice came to an abrupt stop. He had said what he should say. There was no need to say what he shouldn't say. Why did he chase him all the way to the Supreme Palace enclosure? The Heart Demon Oath was only one of the reasons. In fact, Yuhuan Tianzuan's biggest mistake was actually, even if he guessed that Qin Shi might care a lot about the mortals on Earth, he did not guess the weight of these mortals in Qin Shi's heart. If Yuhuan Tianzuan had not delayed Qin Shi in such a brutal way, perhaps Qin Shi might have turned a blind eye and let Tiandu live. So what if he was a celestial lord? In Qin Shi's eyes, he was no different from an ordinary person. Although he had not returned to Earth and was unable to determine how much damage this disaster had caused to mankind. But as long as he thought about it, he could come up with a rough figure in his heart. This was definitely an astronomical figure. And compared to these innocent victims, what were the mere thousands of people in Tiandu? So, they must die. So what if they escaped to the Supreme Palace enclosure? So what if they found the 4 great spiritual masters? If I say I want to kill you, then I must kill you. This was Qin Shi's attitude. The 4 great spiritual masters did not understand. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly understood. Remove the great formation. At that moment, he was like an old man on the verge of death, waving his hand dispiritedly to signal everyone to remove the great formation. Everyone could not help but look at each other, completely unable to understand what he meant. In this regard, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not explain much. Instead, he directly walked out of the protective range of the Great Formation in front of everyone present. Mr. Qin, Yuhuan Tianzuan paused for a moment, then suddenly lowered his head to Qin Shi and said, this old man knows his mistake. Qin Shi did not reply. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan could not help but reveal a bitter smile. This old man is the head of the 10 celestial sovereigns. Everything in Tiandu is decided by this old man alone. Today's matter is all because of this old man. This old man knows that his sins are grave and does not dare to ask for Mr.'s forgiveness. I only hope that Mr. can give these poor children a way out on account of the fact that my Tiandu has long since ceased to exist in name. As he spoke, Yuhuan Tianzuan turned his head to look at the remnants of the Tiandu battalion. Behind him. At this time, everyone finally understood what he wanted to do, so they all tried to dissuade him. Sky Sovereign, we are not afraid of him. Come back quickly. We can still hold on. At most, we'll just die in the bird's nest. What are we afraid of? Right? We're not afraid of him. For the prestige of the sacred ancestor. For the glory of Tiandu. These people in front of him were the last hope of Tiandu. Yuhuan Tianzuan silently looked at the crowd, but the corner of his mouth suddenly revealed a faint smile. Then he turned to look at Qin Shi. Didn't Qin Shi want him to give a reasonable explanation? Then try your best. Since things have come to this old man is only willing to use my blood to quell the anger in your heart. I only hope that Mr. can let them live. Sigh. After a deep sigh, this Yuhuan Tianzuan, who had been in charge of Tiandu for hundreds of years, completely turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. However, even though Yuhuan Tianzuan had died on the spot, the sword in Qin Shi's hand still did not disappear. He looked at everything in front of him indifferently. It seemed that he was not very satisfied with this result. Seeing this, the remaining Empyreans couldn't help but look at each other. Then, as if they had made up their minds, they all walked out of the range of the great array. The successive deaths of the 10 Empyreans seemed to announce the end of the era that belonged to Tiandu. And with their fall, everything that happened today was destined to be recorded in the annals of history. On this day, Qin Shi alone, in the Supreme Palace enclosure's jade clear grotto heaven, forced back the 4 great spiritual masters, and forced the 10 Empyreans to their deaths. The Lord of the Sky's core. From this, his might shook the Supreme Palace enclosure. Chapter 498. After the death of the 10 Empyreans, Tobagwe naturally couldn't escape death. In this regard, Qin Shi's face didn't show much emotion. As if he was looking at a very ordinary thing, after taking a deep look at the hundreds of people left in Tiandu, the long sword in his hand turned into a wisp of smoke and dissipated in front of him. Since the culprits had all been killed, Qin Shi was too lazy to kill them all. It was just to give some face to the sacred ancestor, so that the inheritance of Tiandu would not be cut off because of this. Then, Qin Shi finally cast his gaze on Taoist Master Void Pierce again. He did not have a good impression of these 4 greedy old bastards. Thus, he hastily cupped his hands and bowed. Then he coldly said, "This matter is over. This Qin will not disturb you all any longer. Goodbye." As soon as his voice fell, without waiting for Taoist Master Void Pierce's reply, Qin Shi had turned into a stream of light and completely disappeared from jade clear grotto heaven. Taoist cave spirit seemed to be a little dissatisfied with Qin Shi's arrogant attitude, so after a cold snort, he wanted to move forward to stop him. However, just as Taoist cave spirit was about to move, Taoist Master Void Pierce suddenly stopped him. "Junior brother, don't act rashly. This person's cultivation is almost the same as mine, and his grasp of the true meaning of the word void is quite proficient. Even if the 4 of us join forces, we don't have full confidence that we can stop him today. In that case, why would Jade Clear Grotto Heaven want to make such a strong enemy for no reason? Let him go. Today's matter is over. In addition, regarding the aftermath of Tiandu, everything will be handed over to Junior Brother Tongxian to deal with. Junior Brother Cave Spirit, come with me. Senior Brother has something to say to you." Qin Shi left the Supreme Palace enclosure just like that. He didn't even bother to think about any problems related to Tiandu, because everything that happened next had nothing to do with him. And the reason why he didn't kill Tiandu was actually because of this. The 4 Taoist masters seemed to have lost face, but in the end, they also got the benefits they wanted, namely, the remnants of Tiandu. Tiandu represented an era that was completely different from the Supreme Palace enclosure. The 4 spiritual masters could tolerate Qin Shi brushing away their face, but they absolutely could not tolerate Qin Shi killing the remnants of the Tiandu division in front of them. If that was the case, wouldn't it mean that all their hard work today was in vain? Although the celestial sovereigns of the 10 directions had fallen, the sacred ancestor Taiching's inheritance had been passed down. This was the inheritance from the Dubhe ruins. How could the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven not be tempted? And this was the bottom line of the 4 sages. If Qin Shi's bottom line was to kill all the culprits, then Yuhuan Tianzuan's bottom line was to let Tiandu's inheritance continue. All 3 parties had their own bottom lines. In the end, it was obvious that the final result could only be produced under the condition that these three bottom lines were not touched. Back to Qin Shi. After leaving the Supreme Palace enclosure, Qin Shi did not rush back to Earth immediately. Instead, he stayed near the Aot Nebula for a while. Everything that had happened before could be considered as a reminder to Qin Shi. After losing the protection of the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, the solar system had long been reduced to a vegetable market where everyone could enter and exit freely. Naturally, Qin Shi was very dissatisfied with this. The universe was so big. If the Supreme Palace enclosure could appear today, who knew what kind of terrifying monster would appear tomorrow? The current Earth was still too weak and could not withstand such repeated torment. Therefore, the matter of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars was imperative. Thinking of this, Qin Shi took out the soul mirror and studied it carefully. However, this broken mirror had been in a sealed state ever since he forcefully brought out the remnant soul of his sister-in-law. Even if Qin Shi used all kinds of methods, he could not successfully activate it. Helpless, Qin Shi could only temporarily put aside the idea of reactivating the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars, and use his own method to build a barrier for the solar system. The Tai Ching divine ancestor used the grand formation of sun, moon, and stars to seal the entire solar system. Such a shocking move could not be done by a mere insightful emptiness realm cultivator. Therefore, Qin Shi could only use a more clever method, and that was setting up one after another waymark in the Aot Nebula, and finally connecting these waymarks together to serve as a warning. Although the waymarks could not prevent outsiders from entering like the grand formation, Qin Shi could be informed of the news immediately and set off to check it out. Although this arrangement was a little strenuous and unrewarding, it played a certain defensive role. Presumably, today's incident would not happen again. Besides, judging from the commotion Qin Shi had caused at the Supreme Palace enclosure earlier, even if someone wanted to sneak into the Tianshu ruins to investigate in the future, they would probably think twice before doing so. After all, there was a living paragon living inside. Because the Aot Nebula was simply too big, by the time Qin Shi finished setting up the waymarks and successfully returned to Earth, nearly half a month had passed. This was the first time Qin Shi had left without saying goodbye. The little girl clearly remembered what Qin Shi had said to her before he left. Therefore, every day after school, she would sit in the courtyard with Big Cat in her arms and stare at the sky, constantly muttering when her father would come back. The April sun shone on the ground, causing the calm lake to sparkle. The willows on the shore of Hohai gently swayed their bodies, as if telling passers-by the beauty of summer. In the blink of an eye. That cute little girl back then, she was almost 7 years old now. 7 years old. Whenever a child reached this age and stayed in school for a period of time, there would inevitably be some new changes in their body. The words primary school student. In fact, it was a sign that she had already entered another important stage in her life. Because at this age, children would no longer be as ignorant as before. Instead, they would learn to think like adults. For example, Nian Nian was now thinking about a very important question. Big Cat, I remember you could become bigger in the past? I was riding on top of you. Why can't you become bigger now? Hurry up and show me. As she spoke, Nian Nian picked up Big Cat with both hands, lifted it in the air, and shook it left and right. In this regard, Big Cat rolled its eyes and pretended not to hear. One had to know that Qin Ruing hadn't even returned home when the little guy rode the Big Cat. And as she grew older, Qin Shi had already ordered Big Cat not to change back to its original form. After not seeing Big Cat for 2 or 3 years, the little girl's memory would inevitably be a little different. Therefore, she could not help but wonder if she remembered wrongly. With Big Cat's small body, how could it carry her? Girls develop earlier than boys. In addition, she would be 7 years old next month, so Nian Nian's height had already reached 2 meters. She had to buy an adult ticket to board the plane. But what about Big Cat? This guy was still the same as before, a little bigger than a fart, as if there was no change at all. Chapter 499. April in the Human World. Hundreds of flowers bloomed, willow trees were graceful, clear water conveyed love, mountain ranges were covered in fragrances everywhere. It was a sunny afternoon, but faint thoughts were flowing slowly in this overflowing spring. Nian Nian hugged Big Cat and sat quietly on a chair. However, her pair of beautiful big eyes looked around from time to time. She only hoped that in the blink of an eye, she would be able to see her father suddenly appear by her side. Perhaps she was already used to Chin-Shi not being at home for a long time, so after the little guy was in a daze in the courtyard for a while, he hugged Big Cat and ran out of the Chuehua gate. "Mom, I'm going to find Wenwen and Mingming to play." After saying that, without waiting for Qin Ruing to reply, the little guy had already opened the gate. This was her daily schedule outside of school. Either the brothers came to her house to watch cartoons, or she went out to find the brothers to walk around outside. Every time at this time, Chung Hua and Iji would follow behind her with a frown, looking at the three little guys running around Hohai. The way of the world now was not the same as before. In the past, no matter the age of the child, as long as they learned to run, they could play with the group. Their parents might come from the same brigade or from the same courtyard. In short, no matter the age, the children would always naturally gather together. A group of people would run over, and a group of people would run over. At that time, there were no exquisite toys. Among the children, there would naturally be a child king. Then, under the lead of this child king, a group of people would go up the mountain to catch cicadas today, and go into the water to catch fish tomorrow. Once the weather was bad, everyone would hide in the old factory to play hide and seek, play jump rope, and live a happy life. Such a pure childhood. Thinking about it, it was very beautiful. But it was a pity, with the change of time, these forms of entertainment had basically bid farewell to the children's childhood. Instead, there were mobile phones, iPads, cartoons, and all kinds of exquisite toys. The times were progressing, but people's hearts were becoming more and more indifferent. In the past, as long as a child stood outside the door and shouted, even if the child was only 4 or 5 years old, the parents could let him go out to play without worry. What if they tried it now? Wouldn't their parents chase after them with a broom? It was rare to see parents who allowed their children to roam freely in the neighborhood. More and more children were restricted by their parents to a safe range that they could accept, which also led to the children having less and less contact with peers of the same age. There was an essay question called "My Little Friends" in primary school Chinese. The frequency of this question appearing was second only to "The Most Unforgettable Thing" and "My Parents." Who knew which little friend the children were thinking of when they were writing this essay? Luban number 7 or Arthur? The three little fellows strolled around Hohai. After seeing many people swimming in the water, they stood by the shore and eagerly watched. They had learned how to skate, but they had not learned how to swim yet. Therefore, after seeing so many people frolicking in the lake, the three little fellows were immediately moved. The water quality in Hohai is very good. Swimming in the wild here can be considered a custom of the old Shangjing people. Although the authorities clearly prohibited swimming in Hohai, it couldn't stop the enthusiasm of the local people. Once the weather warmed up, more and more people would sneak to Hohai to swim. "Nian Nian, I heard from the teacher that cats can swim. How about, let's throw Big Cat into the water and see if it can swim?" Summer vacation was in 2 months. When school started in the second half of the year, the three of them would officially enter the 2nd grade. As they got older, the brothers came up with more and more bad ideas. One guessed that if she sneaked into the water, Gu Lao would drag her to the yard and beat her repeatedly when she got home. Therefore, she came up with the idea of the Big Cat. The old man strictly forbade them from swimming in the river, but he didn't say that Big Cat was not allowed to swim in the river. Therefore, after hearing Wenwen's suggestion, the little fellow was obviously moved. She had been to the sea, and she had also been to the water. However, the turbulent water was obviously different from the calm lake in front of her. And because she had seen the sea, the moment she heard Wenwen's suggestion, Nian Nian was slightly excited and said to the Big Cat, "Big Cat, do you like swimming? Swimming is fun. I'll take you to swim, okay?" The Big Cat was lying lazily in her arms and taking a nap. The moment it heard the little fellow say that she was going to take it to swim, its feline instincts made its hair stand on end. Meow. The three children were standing by the lake, and there were steps under the river embankment. According to Nian Yan's idea, after letting the big cat swim in the water, they could stand here and take the big cat back. Therefore, she didn't even wait for the big cat to come back to its senses. As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly let go and threw the big cat directly into the back of the lake. Meow! This time, the big cat was really panicking. As a cat, it was one thing to be able to swim, but it was another thing to be afraid of water. Therefore, the moment it was thrown out by Nian Yan, the big cat began to twist its body crazily in the air. It wanted to borrow strength, but it couldn't find any place to do so. It could only watch as it got closer and closer to the deep lake. Meow! With a shriek, its body suddenly expanded by 30% in the air. It was instinctive to be afraid of water. Driven by its instincts, it obviously didn't care about Qin-Shi's constant warnings. Therefore, the moment the big cat was about to fall into the water, its body grew at least 2 to 3 times its original size. But at this moment, a ray of vital energy shot out from nowhere, and then it forced the big cat back into its domestic cat form. But, with the sound of falling into the water, the big cat seemed to have suffered a great grievance, and soaked in the water, it meowed miserably. I told you it could swim. Seeing that the big cat didn't sink into the water, the two brothers immediately shouted happily. However, when Nian Yan saw the big cat's pitiful appearance, she suddenly thought of something, so she quickly walked down the steps, then stood on the shore and waved at the big cat. Big cat, come over quickly, the water is cold. As she spoke, Nian Yan reached her hand into the lake. The lake was indeed very cold. Big cat, I'm sorry. The water is so cold I shouldn't have thrown you into the water. Come, I'll hold you, this way you won't be cold, right? After pulling the big cat out of the lake, Nian Yan began to apologize to the big cat. She completely ignored the big cat's wet body, and directly hugged the big cat into her arms, trying to use her body to drive the cold away for the big cat. Seeing this, the two brothers couldn't laugh anymore. At this time, they finally realized that they were in the wrong. So they imitated Nian Yan, surrounded the big cat and apologized with a heart full of guilt. Exploration and practice. This was a process that children had to go through in the process of growing up. Because of the immaturity of the mind, they would always do a lot of unreasonable things unintentionally. At this time, the effect of a parent's blind punishment was far less than the correct guidance. Even if Qin-Shi wasn't by her side today, Nian Yan still quickly realized that she was in the wrong. What did this mean? It meant that she was really starting to grow up and gradually forming her own worldview. You have such a cute and sensible daughter. Mr. Chen, you're so lucky. I'm so envious. Just as the three little guys were running in circles around the big cat, Qin-Shi and Jiang Yan silently appeared not far behind them. In fact, Qin-Shi had come back a long time ago. It was just that he saw that Nian Yan was having fun, so he didn't show up to disturb them. And the reason why Qin-Shi didn't go home immediately was because, of course, it was because of Jiang Yan. After all, if Jiang Yan hadn't arrived in time, Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan might have been served with good food and drinks by the Tuoba family right now. Chapter 500. If Jiang Yan had not arrived in time, Yuhuan Tianzuan and his group would have successfully entered the space jump and reached the Supreme Palace enclosure as quickly as possible. Although Qin-Shi could chase after Yuhuan Tianzuan to the Supreme Palace enclosure after dealing with the Toba family's men of sacrifice. But by that time, Tiandu's group might have already broken up into pieces and scattered in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Could it be? Could Qin-Shi plow through the Supreme Palace enclosure and find everyone in Tiandu even if he had to dig 3 feet into the ground? Even if Qin-Shi really had the leisure to do so, he did not have so much time to waste in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Therefore, it was obviously the best result to be able to catch the remnants of Tiandu before they scattered. Qin-Shi was very satisfied with this result. The matter of thanking Jiang Yan was naturally within reason. This was a catastrophe that affected the whole world and appeared almost everywhere at the same time. Although the disaster did not last long, it still brought huge losses to mankind, and the American continent suffered the most. This disaster was unanimously named by scientists all over the world, Skyfire. It was said to be a supernatural phenomenon caused by a solar storm. As for the specific cause of skyfire, scientists were still researching and had not yet given a rigorous and reasonable report. Skyfire swept across the world, but Huaxia was the least affected. Only the city of Zygaze and a few surrounding villages and towns were attacked by skyfire. As Europe was too close to Asia, they were the first to receive support from Diu Island. Africa was poor and Australia was small. These places were sparsely populated and were not the first target of the Tuoba family. Therefore, the American continent, which was far away at the other end of the Pacific Ocean, naturally became the disaster area. Oldme had been through a lot in the past few years. First, there was the threat of the supervolcano, and then there was the trouble of Changhua and Iji. After a while of peace, skyfire came again. Perhaps this was retribution. Oldme did not do bad things in Central Asia because of oil, which directly caused the local people to suffer the pain of war. After the skyfire incident, Oldme could finally have some peace and quiet. Nowadays, the TV stations broadcast the disaster situations all day long. But for the viewers watching the TV, as long as the disaster did not befall them, wouldn't they still be eating and sleeping every day? Disaster relief? That was a matter for the country. At most, the commoners would chat with each other after a meal. Jiang Yan accepted Qin Shi's thanks with a smile. In addition, he also brought a slightly surprising piece of news to Qin Shi. That was, Diu Island had officially joined the Wu Lian. Because of this, Jiang Yan became one of the Wu Lian tycoons. His status was even higher than Qin Yongwang and Wang Chuanju. All in all, Jiang Yan was much more sensible than Yuhuan Tianzun. Ever since Jiang Yan had known Qin Shi, this old guy had been sending gifts and running errands for him. The only thing he hadn't done was to enshrine Qin Shi in the ancestral hall. As the saying goes, the older the wiser. Combining the information collected by the 9 serenities and the bits and pieces of information he heard from Qin Shi, Jiang Yan immediately connected the dots and guessed most of it. Seeing that Qin Shi had even taken care of Tiandu, if he still dared to jump around under Qin Shi's nose, wouldn't he be tired of living? Therefore, Jiang Yan immediately changed the management strategy of the 9 serenities. Since he couldn't beat you, he might as well join you. After all, the 9 serenities was different from Tiandu. Jiang Yan didn't have as much self-esteem as Yuhuan Tianzun. Who didn't want to work with? Since there were benefits to following Qin Shi, why would he waste time blindly thinking about it? In this regard, Qin Shi didn't express any opinions. After all, he didn't own Wu Lian and Jiang Yan wasn't his subordinate. Why should he worry so much? If he had the time, he might as well spend it playing with Nian Yan. The days returned to normal. In the blink of an eye. The little girl was now 7 years old and had officially entered the 2nd grade of primary school. It had to be said that Nian Yan was a child that didn't cause anyone to worry about her. As soon as Qin Shi sent Nian Yan to the classroom, the teacher came to find him alone. Nian Yan's class teacher was surnamed Zhang. She was a woman in her 30s or 40s and looked very kind. Mr. Qin, it's like this. Chen Yan's academic results and her performance in all aspects are extremely outstanding in the entire grade. As her class teacher, I feel like I have an obligation to remind you. I wonder, have you ever considered letting Chen Yan skip a grade? Hearing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but be stunned. Skip a grade? In fact, skipping a grade was actually a very common thing in primary school because the Department of Education also had clear regulations in this regard. According to the Department of Education's regulations, as long as the student's academic performance was particularly outstanding and reached the 1st grade in advance, the student or their parents could apply. After a comprehensive assessment by the school and a written report to the Higher Education Department for approval, the student could skip the grade. After all, everyone's IQ was different. There were always children whose IQ was far higher than their peers. She already knew calculus. Did she have to be locked in the classroom with her peers to calculate addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division? Chen Shi had officially begun to teach Nian Yan cultivation. Although he only taught Nian Yan how to gather qi and didn't teach her any techniques after that. However, under the constant scouring of the spirit energy of heaven and earth, Nian Yan's intelligence would inevitably increase by leaps and bounds. At this rate, it wouldn't be long before Nian wouldn't be able to play with the two brothers anymore, and this was also the fundamental reason why Qin had always been opposed to letting Nian cultivate. It felt like he was giving Nian a catalyst. It inevitably gave him a strange feeling. There was a saying, hope for your son to become a dragon and hope for your daughter to become a phoenix. Was Qin really different from those flirtatious B******s? Did he really have to turn his daughter into a fool? How was that possible? At this point, Qin could only let nature take its course. Now that the homeroom teacher took the initiative to mention this point, it actually meant that Nian really wasn't suitable to continue staying in the second grade. The matter of skipping grades was something that had to be done. However, before this, Qin still had to ask the little girl for her opinion. After all, there were two sides to everything. Grades during the compulsory education period were secondary. Physical and mental health were the most important. Children in the lower grades were not mentally mature. Suddenly changing from a familiar environment to an unfamiliar environment and surrounded by children who were older than her naturally took a long time to adapt. Once the child couldn't adapt, the impact could be extremely bad or even irreversible. Therefore, after Qin and teacher Zhang had a detailed discussion, he called the little girl to the office. Nian, tell Daddy, do you want to skip a grade? Chapter 501. Skip a grade? The little girl blinked her eyes, as if she did not understand what Qin meant. Seeing this, Qin patiently explained to her, the teacher said that with your grades, you don't need to go to the second grade. You can go directly to the third grade and study with the third grade brothers and sisters. Nian, do you want to go? Hearing this, the little girl smiled proudly. Sure. The students in our class are too stupid. They can't even do such simple questions. I'm much smarter than them. I already know how to do the third grade questions. The little girl's grades were very good. It was inevitable that the teacher would take the initiative to give her special attention, so she had already done the third grade questions before. And this was also the reason why the teacher took the initiative to ask Qin to let Nian skip a grade. To Qin, grades were naturally secondary. A child's physical and mental health was the most important. Therefore, even if the little girl showed an eager look, Qin was still a little worried and reminded her, Nian, you have to think carefully. You're now a student of the second grade class. If you skip a grade, you'll be a student of the second grade class. Look, the second grade class is there. As he said this, Qin led the little girl to the window, then carried her and indicated to her to look at the classroom opposite. That was the second grade class. She did not know any of the classmates in the class. If she chose to skip a grade, then from today onwards, she would be a student of this class. For a child, it would be easier for them to understand if there was a real example. Therefore, when the little girl saw the unfamiliar faces in the classroom of the third grade class too, she immediately hesitated. She would be studying in that classroom in the future? The little girl stared at the classroom opposite. The expression on her little face was very serious. She did not immediately express her opinion. However, Qin saw the hesitation in her, so he immediately turned around and smiled at teacher Zhang. Was there a need to say this? Nian must be scared. Instead of forcing her into an unfamiliar environment, it was better to let her stay in the second grade class. At least it wouldn't bring too much psychological pressure to her. Qin's mind turned, and he suddenly made a decision. Zhang Laoshe didn't have any objections to this. After all, she had seen too many situations like this. Basically, every year, a few children would face such a choice. There were pros and cons to skipping grades, so she was only responsible for making suggestions. The final decision was still in the hands of the parents. Thank you for your concern, teacher Zhang. As you can see, this child doesn't seem to be very willing, so the matter of skipping grades, Qin turned around and thanked teacher Zhang. But at this moment, the little fellow suddenly interrupted him. Dad, what are the benefits of skipping grades? After saying that, the little guy looked up at Qin, his eyes filled with curiosity. Benefits? There are many of them. Look, you have to study for a full 6 years in primary school. If you skip grades, you will study 1 year less than others. You will enter secondary school and even university earlier, taking 10,000 steps back. If your results aren't good in the future, you can even repeat a year more than others. No matter how you look at it, it's still a win. Of course, with your results, repeating a year is definitely impossible. Dad believes in you. Chen Shi briefly explained the benefits of skipping grades to the little fellow and didn't forget to encourage her at the end. Hearing this, the little fellow put on a thoughtful expression. She already understood the benefits of skipping grades. As for the disadvantages of skipping grades, in fact, Chen Shi didn't need to point it out. The little fellow could clearly feel it herself. Chen Shi never forced the little fellow. So when he saw Nian Nian's hesitation, he immediately made a decision in his heart. However, Chen Shi didn't notice. The little fellow had already learned how to read people's expressions. So even if he didn't express any attitude, the little fellow could keenly sense that her father still hoped that she would choose to skip grades. After all, for any parent, if their child could skip grades, it would be a great thing. Because this showed how outstanding their child was. Chen Shi felt sorry for the little fellow, just like how the little fellow felt sorry for him. Nian Nian didn't want to disappoint Chen Shi. Therefore, after thinking about it seriously, she said to Chen Shi with a determined face, "Dad, I want to skip grades." This time, it was Chen Shi's turn to be surprised. He thought that Nian Nian didn't understand the pros and cons, so he immediately asked, "Nian Nian, do you really want to skip grades? Aren't you afraid? After skipping grades, you won't be in this class anymore. The students in class 2 of grade 3 are all 1 year older than you. Who knows, they might even gang up to bully you." As soon as this was said, a trace of embarrassment flashed across Teacher Zhang's face. If she didn't want to skip grades, then so be it. Who would scare a child like this? Furthermore, was their school the kind of third-rate school that would tolerate bullying? Teacher Zhang wanted to say something but stopped. Nian Nian immediately replied, "I'm not afraid. Although I'm younger than them, I'm smarter than them. Why should I be afraid? I'm also the class monitor of our class. I want to be the class monitor of grade 3 class 2 in the future. Also, no one in our class dares to bully me. I'll beat up whoever dares to bully me." At this point, Nian Nian clenched her little fist and added proudly, "This is what you taught me, Dad. Did you forget, Dad?" Hearing this, Chen Shi instantly felt awkward. After glancing at Teacher Zhang with some embarrassment, he hurriedly stopped the little fellow's bold words. "Don't talk nonsense. Dad didn't teach you to hit people. Dad, you clearly said that before. When did I? The teacher is right next to us. Don't talk nonsense. I did. Dad is shameless." The father and daughter joked around for a while. When Teacher Zhang saw this, he didn't take it to heart. Instead, he went back to his seat and smiled as he handed a form to Chen Shi. "Mr. Chen, this is the child's grade skipping application form. Please fill it in accordingly. After filling it out, I'll submit it to the school for review. After the school's review is completed and the information is submitted to the Education Bureau, the child's school roll can be changed in about 7 working days. Of course, this is all part of the process. School starts today. If you don't have any other opinions, Nian Nian can directly report to grade 3 class 2 with me. That's it." Chen Shi took the form from the teacher with some hesitation. After all, he didn't know that the little fellow already had her own ideas. He only thought that the little fellow didn't understand the pros and cons of this and thought that it was a fun thing to do. Regarding this, the little fellow was exceptionally resolute. She wasn't afraid. Furthermore, she would perform better than before. She definitely wouldn't disappoint her father. Thinking about it, if Chen Shi knew the little fellow's true thoughts, he would definitely be moved to tears by this considerate little jacket. "Sorry, I've been sorting out the plot for the past 2 days, so the update is a little slow. Please forgive me." Chapter 502. The little girl's third-grade life began abruptly. According to the school's arrangements, today was the day that the new teaching materials were distributed. Hence, after the little girl returned to second-grade class 2 and picked up her backpack, she left the classroom that was supposed to belong to her under the watchful eyes of her classmates. At that moment, Chen Shi saw a proud expression on the little girl's face. It had to be said that this child really made her father proud. Under the guidance of the teacher, Nian quickly arrived at the entrance of 3rd grade class 2. The form teacher of 3rd grade class 2 was also a middle-aged woman with the surname Li. She was slightly chubby and looked exceptionally amiable. It should be known that the form teachers of elementary schools were usually not changed easily. From the day the child entered school, the form teacher would always be by their side for the next 6 years until the child graduated. Hence, the moment teacher Li saw Nian, her face was so happy that flowers were about to bloom. Since this child could skip grades, it meant that she had huge potential. In Hua Xia, the child's results were naturally the teacher's achievements. Wasn't this equivalent to her picking up a huge bargain? Teacher Li was so happy that she wanted to help Nian carry her backpack. But she didn't expect that. Her suggestion was politely rejected by the little girl. "Thank you, teacher. I'm a student. I should carry my own backpack." Seeing the little girl's obedient manner, Teacher Li was instantly delighted. "Oh, this child is so sensible. You're called Chen, right? I like you." It was class time now, so after a simple exchange of words with Teacher Zhang, Teacher Li directly put her hand on the little girl's shoulder and walked her into 3rd grade class 2. The 3rd-year students were basically all old foxes. After Teacher Li went out and was delayed for a while, the classroom suddenly became a little noisy. "Come, everyone quiet down. Let me introduce you. This is our new classmate, Chen. Everyone welcome." After saying that, Teacher Li took the lead in clapping her hands. In an instant, there was a burst of lively applause in the classroom. The little fellow stood nervously beside Teacher Li. Looking at the unfamiliar faces below the stage, she suddenly felt a burst of fear in her heart for no reason, so much so that her little face slightly tensed up. "Chen skipped a grade, so he should be 1 year younger than you, but her grades are very good, so she doesn't need to go to the 2nd grade anymore. Now that she's in our class, she'll be the youngest student in our class. As Chen elder brother and sister, you should." Speaking up to this point, Teacher Li deliberately paused for a moment, then raised his hand to signal the students present to answer together. Seeing this, the students in the class were also quick-witted. Even if they hadn't rehearsed it beforehand, they all replied in unison, "Take care of her. Chen is our younger sister, so we have to take care of her." The little guy was a little confused. The students in the class were too enthusiastic. After hearing such warm applause and cheers, the tension on the little guy's face slowly dissipated, and he gradually revealed a shy smile. She stood silently in the corridor, smiling as he watched his daughter reintegrate into a new big family. This scene was somewhat familiar. That smart and sensible little baby had finally grown into a shy flower bud. Girls matured earlier, and Nian was on the tall side. Even in the 3rd grade, she was considered average height, so the teacher could only arrange for her to sit in the 3rd row from the back. One had to know that the little brat now was incredible. Not to mention the 3rd grade, even kindergarten had the phenomenon of puppy love. Regarding this, many parents' reactions were, "The child is still young and doesn't know anything. It's just 2 people together for fun." On this point, their understanding was too one-sided. Actually, children also knew what it meant to be in a relationship. It was just that their thinking was still very simple, and they couldn't understand the meaning of the word sex. What was wrong with children? Couldn't children like other people? Thinking about the opposite sex day and night, yearning for the opposite sex day and night, this wasn't something only adults could do. Children could also like people. It was just that some children were too shy. Even if they liked someone very much, they would never show the slightest bit of it. They would even show an inexplicable hostility to the person they liked. In the words of an adult, it should be, 300 taels of silver here. In Shi's eyes, Nian was simply a little kid who hadn't been weaned yet. But in the eyes of her peers, Nian, on the other hand, was a true goddess. There were many precocious children in this class, at least half of them. Therefore, when Nian finished her self-introduction and walked from the podium to her seat, almost everyone was staring at her. Some of the bolder ones stared straight at her, not even blinking their eyes. Some of the more timid ones deliberately turned their heads to the side and secretly looked out of the corner of their eyes. Almost every child had their own thoughts about this student who had suddenly skipped a grade. However, most of the boys' hearts were filled with admiration, while most of the girls' hearts were filled with jealousy, since she naturally saw the subtle changes on everyone's faces. However, he was like many parents and didn't take these things to heart. They were just children. They were the flowers of the motherland. They were the pillars of the motherland's future. How could they have so many dirty thoughts? Seeing the little guy sitting down, Chen Shi's mood immediately relaxed. He gave Big Cat a look, and the cat immediately understood Chen Shi's meaning. So, like a wisp of smoke, it leapt up to the big tree in the middle of the school building, and then lay down on a tree branch facing third-year class 2 to take a nap. Then, Chen Shi nodded at the teacher through the window to thank him, and then quietly left. The little guy seemed to have noticed that her father had left, so she quickly looked out of the window, but there was no one there. Seeing this, a trace of disappointment flashed across her face. But soon, this disappointment disappeared with the new teaching materials handed out by the teacher. By the time she took out a fountain pen and solemnly wrote her name on the first page of each book, her third-year studies had officially begun. Thieves in first grade, thieves in second grade. No one chased after the third-grade beauties. Love letters from the fourth grade flew everywhere. Piles of homework from the fifth grade. Pairs of lovebirds from the sixth grade. This is our class song. Once, it was too loud and alarmed the teaching director. Then, the whole class was scolded by him. Well, at that time, I was in third grade. The last few lines are more serious, so I won't write them here. Chapter 503. After settling the little girl down, Chen Shi left the school. As soon as he walked out of the school gate, he looked up and saw Qin Ruiying in a white dress, waiting quietly by the side of the road. In fact, Chen Shi had already said that there was no need for two people to pick up and drop off the child, but Qin Ruiying did not pay attention to him at all, and completely treated sending Yin Yin to school as something that she had to do every day. Yin, okay, where do you want to go today? I'll go with you. Before he arrived, Chen Shi's voice came from afar. Qin Ruiying thought for a while, but shook her head gently, and then responded very indifferently, I won't go shopping today, let's go home first, I have a few questions about cultivation that I want to ask you. Ask? Hearing this, Chen Shi was suddenly happy, so he quickly went over and said politely, what's the relationship between the two of us? Do you still need to use the word, ask? Qin Ruiying rolled her eyes at him, and did not say anything. Seeing this, Chen Shi did not feel offended at all. Instead, he happily reached out his hand to hail a taxi. After this period of time together, Qin Ruiying's attitude towards him had improved a lot. On one hand, it was because of the family's enthusiasm towards her. On the other hand, it was entirely because she gradually found many traces of her existence in her daily life. For example, the familiar feeling of walking in the alley, the flowers in the yard, and the photos in the phone, all of these things seemed to be saying, she was the mistress of this family. Therefore, Qin Ruiying's attitude towards Chen Shi gradually improved. Although she had not recalled any memories of the past, at least she had regained the feeling of cultivation under the reminder of her sister-in-law. In addition, it seemed that only when she was cultivating, she could faintly find the intimate feeling that she had with Chen Shi. The many changes in Qin Ruiying were naturally seen by Chen Shi. Therefore, every time he thought of this problem, he could not help but feel a burst of joy in his heart. If it continued to develop at this rate, wouldn't it not be long before he could climb into Yingying's bed again? They didn't wander around today, so when the couple returned to the Sai courtyard, it was only 9 in the morning. As soon as Chen Shi pushed open the door, the sound of punches and kicks could be heard from the courtyard. It was his sister-in-law and her 2 punching bags. After this period of actual combat, Cheng Hua and Yiji's martial arts had greatly improved. When the 2 of them joined forces, they could even easily survive 200 to 300 rounds against Qin Xueqing. Chen Shi didn't want to disturb them. After nodding slightly to his sister-in-law, he followed Qin Ruiying to the west wing. However, although Chen Shi didn't intend to interrupt them, Cheng Hua directly jumped out of the battle circle the moment he appeared, then quickly came in front of him and said hurriedly, "Mr. Chen, thank you for taking care of me during this period of time. I thank you in advance." Hearing this, Chen Shi had to temporarily stop his footsteps. He glanced at Qin Ruing's back, then glanced at Cheng Hua's anxious face. In the end, he could only let out a long sigh, then asked impatiently, "What's the matter?" It was no wonder that Qin Shi's attitude was so bad. After all, he could only step into the West Wing every day at this time. Being delayed by Cheng Hua like this directly affected the time he had to chat with Ying and cultivate their relationship. Cheng Hua was shocked by Qin Shi's bad attitude. But after being stunned for a moment, he seemed to have mustered up some courage. He quickly lowered his head and cupped his fist to Qin Shi and said loudly, "I have been away from home for a long time. Next month is my mother's birthday. On such an important day, I hope you will allow me to go home and visit my mother. I understand. I am a sinner. Whether I live or die depends on your whims. My request may seem rude, but please allow me to return home for 3 days to fulfill my filial piety, sir. If you are worried, I can make a vow here that I will come back as soon as possible. If I disobey, Xianyuan Cheng Hua is willing to be struck by lightning and not enter the cycle of reincarnation after death." Perhaps he was afraid that Qin Shi wouldn't agree, so Cheng Hua spilled the beans like a bamboo tube, spilling everything he wanted to say. After speaking, this kid was like a child who had done something wrong. He tilted his head and peeked at Qin Shi eagerly. "It is your mother's 100th birthday, so you want to go home to fulfill your filial piety?" Hearing this, Qin Shi did not immediately respond. Instead, he looked at his sister-in-law thoughtfully. Although he had caught this kid with his own hands, he had already handed them over to his sister-in-law to deal with. Looking at this posture, this kid seemed to have calculated that he was easier to talk to than Qin Xueqing. So he did not even ask for Qin Xueqing's opinion and directly came to ask for his approval. Chen Shi did not speak, but Cheng Hua was a little anxious. So he immediately knelt on the ground, bowed and shouted, "I hope you will allow me to go home on account of my filial piety. If not, I would rather commit suicide on the spot than live an ignoble life in this world." Cheng Hua's words were powerful and resonating. After hearing this, Qin Shi laughed. "Oh, are you threatening me?" After hearing Qin Shi's words, Cheng Hua's heart suddenly jumped. He suddenly remembered Qin Shi's character. Oh no. Mr. Chen was always amenable to coaxing but not coercion. He had to change his method of asking him. Thinking of this, Cheng Hua immediately changed his strategy. Instead, he looked at Qin Shi with grief and indignation. At the same time, he looked at Qin Shi with a pitiful expression. Seeing that this kid had stopped talking and was looking at him so pitifully, Qin Shi was too lazy to tease him anymore. So, he directly asked Qin Xueqing, "Since the two of them are under your care, how do you think we should deal with this matter?" Hearing this, before Qin Xueqing could speak, a trace of despair flashed across Cheng Hua's face. They had known each other for so long. Chen Shi would invite the two of them to sit down and eat together when he had nothing to do. But what about Qin Xueqing? Every day, she would beat them up violently. She had never been kind to them. Therefore, the moment he heard Qin Shi ask for Qin Xueqing's opinion, Cheng Hua's heart had already lost all hope. But what Cheng Hua did not expect was Qin Xueqing's answer was 10,000 times better than he had imagined. Everyone has parents. Since he is so filial, this request is not too much. But the two of you remember, this trip can't be delayed for too long. I heard that it takes 4 days to go back and forth from Earth to the Supreme Palace enclosure. In that case, I'll give the two of you 7 days off. If I don't see the two of you back after 7 days, I think the two of you should know very well what the consequences will be. After speaking, Qin Xueqing walked to the East Wing without looking back. Only the two of them were left standing there in a daze. She agreed just like that? Cheng Hua was in a daze. Ji blinked and could not help but wonder if he had heard wrongly. It was not his mother's birthday. He did not expect that he could actually go home with Cheng Hua to visit his family. Qin Xueqing actually agreed. Seeing the two of them looking as if they had seen a ghost, Chen Shi could not help but smile. Then, he turned around and walked into the West Wing. If Cheng Hua and Yi Ji were to be seen as students, Then Qin Xueqing was obviously their class teacher whom they feared like a tiger. Mischievous bad children were never liked by teachers. The two of them knew their place. Therefore, if they were to ask their class teacher to sign a leave of absence, they would rather forge a leave of absence than step into their class teacher's office. This was the general prejudice that bad children had against their class teacher. In fact, why would a class teacher discriminate against every child in her class? Therefore, even though her sister-in-law beat the two of them up every day, actually, she was very warm in her heart. Chapter 504. After getting Qin Shi and Qin Xueqing's approval, Cheng Hua and Yi could finally leave this planet that made them feel sad at this moment. Although Qin Shi did not leave any restrictions on them, the two of them were tactful, so they did not even think of using this opportunity to escape from Qin Xueqing's evil clutches. The two of them seemed to have already accepted their fate. Even Cheng Hua, who had always had a fiery temper, did not have any intention of encouraging Yi to escape after regaining control of the cloud-piercing shuttle at this moment. Instead, he looked back at the Azure planet with some reluctance. As expected of a great figure in the Supreme Realm. Such breadth of mind and boldness, you are really a role model for our generation. Yi did not notice the strange look on Cheng Hua's face. Perhaps to relieve the depressing atmosphere on the ship, Yi stood at the stern of the ship and sighed with emotion. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he could not help but tease with a smile. Cheng Hua, let's hide in the heavenly market enclosure, shall we? Cheng Hua did not reply. Seeing this, Yi was like a demon tempting people to fall into depravity. He moved closer to Cheng Hua and continued to bewitch him. How about the purple myrtle enclosure? The three enclosures are like three wooden rafts floating in the vast void. Although their whereabouts are uncertain and difficult to find, they converge once every 100 years. I heard my father mention it before we set off. The next time the three enclosures converge should be within the next 10 years. You see, when the time comes, we only need to hide in the heavenly market enclosure or the purple myrtle enclosure. So what if Mr. Qin is a supreme realm cultivator? Could it be that he can turn the three enclosures upside down and be determined to find us? Ji kept bewitching Cheng Hua. If it was the old Cheng Hua, he might have been persuaded by him and jumped up to hide in the heavenly market enclosure. But unfortunately, after experiencing Qin Xueqing's constant hardships, Cheng Hua's temperament had been restrained a lot. Therefore, after hearing Yi's incessant chatter, Cheng Hua immediately slapped him in annoyance, and then scolded him with a smile on his face. Do you really take me for a fool? If you want to go, then go. What's the use of telling me this? I'm the one who swore to Mr. Qin, not you. What are you afraid of? After hearing Cheng Hua say this, Yi immediately felt relieved. The reason why he tried to bewitch Cheng Hua was because he was afraid that Cheng Hua would act without thinking like before. As the saying goes, a fall into the pit, a gain in your wit. Yi was very pleased with Cheng Hua's change, so he sat next to him with a smile, and then chatted with him casually. Cheng Hua, I don't know what you're thinking, but I think it's actually pretty good for us to stay here. Although we're controlled by others and are punched and kicked by that evil woman every day like a slave. But if we think about it from another perspective, the two of us seem to have learned a lot from it. What's more, Mr. Qin is still in the supreme stage. Even if it's just a simple sentence or two, it will be of great benefit to our future cultivation. So, at this point, Yi deliberately paused, and then said with a determined face, after 7 days, I will definitely be back here. After hearing Yi's words, Cheng Hua seemed to be a little dispirited and didn't seem to be interested in paying attention to him at all. Yi felt that Cheng Hua's behavior was a little strange today, so he couldn't help but push him, and then asked with a puzzled face, What's wrong with you? Aren't you happy to be home? Hearing this, Cheng Hua shook his head, and then muttered in a very strange tone, Don't mess around, I'm thinking about a very serious problem. What problem? I'm thinking about whether Nian will like the taste of the dragon saliva fruit. You see, it's rare for the two of us to go home. We should take this opportunity to bring some gifts back for Nian, right? But I thought about it, and I didn't think of what to bring her. Think about it yourself. What does Nian usually treat us to? Chocolate, biscuits, jelly, French fries, yogurt. These are all delicacies in the world. As a return gift, we can't take out something too shabby, right? After hearing Changhua say this, Iji couldn't help but be stunned. Alright, I actually forgot such an important thing. Come, let's quickly think about what gifts we should bring for Nian. Time flew like an arrow, and the sun and moon flew like a shuttle. In the blink of an eye. A month's time passed. During this time, the adults were busy cultivating in seclusion all day long, and because the little girl skipped a grade, she needed to spend more time reviewing her homework every day. Everyone was busy with their own things, and the courtyard was much quieter because of this. As time passed, although Qin Shueqing didn't have any clear expression, the expression on her face was so gloomy that it seemed like water was about to drip out. They clearly agreed on 7 days, and a month had already passed, but Changhua and Iji still hadn't returned to Earth. Were these two brats playing with her like a monkey? As soon as she thought of this problem, Qin Shueqing's towering chest couldn't help but begin to rise and fall rapidly. After enduring for a full month, she couldn't bear it anymore. Therefore, Qin Shueqing found Qin Shi and wanted to borrow a xingcha from him. Do you still have a xingcha? Lend it to me. Hearing this, Qin Shi raised his eyebrows and asked, What do you want to do? Find someone. I want to see, can they hide to the ends of the earth? Seeing Qin Shueqing gnashing her teeth in anger, Qin Shi suddenly laughed. I think they might be delayed by something. Don't worry, it's only been a month. Wait a little longer, there's no rush. How about this, if they don't come back by next month? I'll find time to go to Supreme Palace enclosure again, and I'll definitely catch the two of them for you, okay? After hearing Qin Shi's promise, Qin Shueqing finally withdrew the idea of going to Supreme Palace enclosure. Then, like an inflated blowfish, she angrily returned to the East Wing room. It couldn't be helped, his sister-in-law's temper was just that bad. If Qin Shi really gave her a xingcha, she would probably immediately go to Supreme Palace enclosure to find Changhua and Iji to reason with them. His sister-in-law was furious, but Qin Shi didn't seem to care too much. This was because he believed that Changhua and Iji would never dare to trick him. After all, the name Mr. Qin. Now, even if it was at Supreme Palace enclosure, it could be considered a golden signboard. Come, wonderful book house. Calm. Chapter 505. Qin Shi was certain that Changhua and Iji would come back, so he didn't take this matter to heart for the time being. Next, let's talk about the little girl first. After a month of adaptation, the little girl had successfully integrated into the new class. Although she was a year younger than her classmates, they didn't dare to look down on her. On one hand, it was because Nian's usual performance was very good, so the teachers liked her very much. On the other hand, it was entirely because of her results in this monthly exam. In Hua Xia's education system, academic results were the only standard to measure a child's quality. Although the little girl skipped a grade, her results in this monthly exam still easily took first place in her grade. Therefore, when the teacher announced the results, the whole class was shocked. Wasn't this the other family's child that parents often talked about? The teacher also said before that after the monthly exam, the class monitor would be selected based on everyone's performance. And in this so-called comprehensive performance, wasn't the exam results the most important indicator? The teachers didn't like children who were unreasonable. Those children who were obedient and sensible, but their grades weren't good enough to convince the masses. Nian's performance and results were very good, plus she was the class monitor in the first grade class. So what reason did the teacher have to not let her be the class monitor? Outstanding children would always be singled out as an example. Therefore, this little girl who had just skipped a grade and entered the third grade, after a monthly exam, her name had already spread throughout the entire grade. On this day, as usual, after the little girl waved goodbye to Qin Shi, she quickly walked to the classroom and prepared to organize everyone to start the morning reading as the class monitor. This was the first task she received after becoming the class monitor, so she was especially attentive to it. As soon as she sat down, she couldn't wait to take out the language textbook from her bag and neatly placed it on the table. It wasn't time for class yet, so only half of the students were there, but the classroom was especially lively. Nian Nian looked back and saw that the most mischievous children in the class were chasing each other with brooms. Therefore, she immediately shouted to stop them, "Quiet! Class is about to begin." It was the class monitor's responsibility to maintain discipline. Now that she had become the class monitor, she naturally had to take on this responsibility. Following her outburst, the classroom suddenly became much quieter. Seeing this, the children who were chasing each other stopped and quickly returned to their seats. They were not afraid of Nian Nian, but they were afraid that Nian Nian would tell on them to the teacher. Nowadays, a class leader who doesn't snitch, is that still the class leader? If Nian Nian's prestige in Year 1 Class 2 was earned through her fists, then her prestige in Year 3 Class 2 was earned through her own outstanding performance. It was the third year. No matter how late a child matured, he should be more sensible by now. Teacher Zhang stepped into the classroom just as the bell rang. Looking at the silent classroom, Teacher Zhang couldn't help but nod his head in satisfaction. Then, he gestured for Nian Nian to come to the podium and lead everyone to start the morning reading. The text for today's morning reading was Zhao Zhou Bridge. It was a simplified version with pinyin annotations. The whole text was less than 500 words. After Nian Nian led the students to read the text twice, the teacher nodded his head in satisfaction and officially began the day's lesson. There were a total of 46 students in their class. It wasn't a large number, so the desks and chairs were all a single set and not a two-person set. After Nian Nian returned to her seat, she took out the textbooks and put them in her drawer as usual. At this moment, she suddenly realized he didn't know when this strange thing appeared in his drawer. Nian Nian took out the thing and saw that it was a letter folded into the shape of a heart. The style of the letter was very exquisite, and it even had a faint fragrance. It was obvious that this was the most popular letter paper in the school's canteen. There was a name written on the heart-shaped letter. It was Chen Yan. Nian Nian frowned and opened it. The first thing she saw was a few lines of crooked, worm-like love messages. To Chen Yan, "I like you. My love for you is very deep as a bottomless pit. I don't look good, but I'm a good person. I'll give you a gift right away. Can you tell me your QQ? And where is your home? My body won't go with you, but my heart will go anywhere with you. Moi heart, 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 heart." Of course, this was the translated version. There were many wrong words in the original text. The child who wrote this didn't seem to know how to write love. After writing it wrong several times, he directly drew a lot of hearts on it. This was a love letter? Nian Nian expressionlessly read the contents of the letter. Then, as if nothing had happened, she directly tore the letter that carried the strong love of others into pieces. No one, including the teacher, noticed anything strange about her. She was silent like this, as if she suddenly had something on her mind. In fact, Nian Nian already knew what a love letter was and what it meant. But she never thought that one day she would also be the one to receive a love letter. Then there was a problem. When faced with such a situation, what should she do? Should she tell the teacher, or should she tell her father? It was probably because the writer had forgotten to sign the letter, so she didn't even know who wrote this strange love letter. What should she do? What should she do? The little girl had something on her mind, so she was obviously a little muddle-headed for the rest of the day. Finally, the crisp and melodious school bell rang. After the teacher assigned the homework for the day, the little girl uncharacteristically rushed out of the classroom with her bag. She ran as fast as she could. Soon, she ran to the school gate. Then, through the school gate, she saw her father standing in the crowd and waving at her. Unlike the teacher, Chen Shi almost instantly noticed the strangeness on the little girl's face. So, he immediately walked out of the crowd and squatted on the ground, smiling and motioning her to come out. "Dad!" As if she had suffered a great grievance, the little girl ran out of the school gate and threw herself into Chen Shi's arms. Seeing this, Chen Shi's eyebrows suddenly twisted. "Nian Nian, what's wrong? Were you bullied at school? Don't be afraid, tell Dad what happened, Dad will help you." When I was writing, I suddenly thought of a song. Let me recommend Love Letter by Jackie Chungo. Unfortunately, Love is not a few drops of tears or a few love letters. This may be a little cruel. People who wait for others to give them happiness often don't live happily. Chapter 506. Looking at his daughter's depressed look, Chen Shi's heart suddenly clenched. After he walked out of the crowd with the little girl, he immediately squatted on the ground, then hugged her and asked patiently, "Nyan, what's wrong? Did someone bully you?" Although the little girl's face had a somewhat aggrieved expression, it did not look like she was bullied. Moreover, with her current physical condition, if she was really angry and went berserk, there would be no problem for her to beat up children of the same age. Therefore, the first thought that came to Chen Shi's mind was actually Nyan was ostracized by her classmates? After all, she was a child who skipped a grade. It was normal for her to not be able to integrate into the new group in a short period of time. Chen Shi had already mentally prepared himself for this, so he immediately began to think about how he could enlighten the little girl. A person's life was a process of constant adaptation. If she wanted to shrink back because she could not adapt to skipping a grade, how could Nyan smoothly adapt to other environments in the future? He had to persuade her properly. But on second thought, Chen Shi had an idea in his mind. But at this moment, the little girl suddenly said timidly, "Daddy, someone wrote me a letter." "The letter? What letter?" Suddenly hearing Nyan's words, Chen Shi's train of thought was suddenly disrupted. The letter? What did she mean? He did not react at all. The father and daughter stood by the street, staring at each other blankly. In an instant, Chen Shi only felt a flash of lightning in his mind, and almost instantly he vaguely understood the meaning of the little girl's words. So, he immediately squeezed out a smile, then pretended to be relaxed and asked, "Nyan, who wrote you a letter? Can you show it to Daddy?" As soon as his voice fell, Chen Shi pretended to look at the little girl with a face full of anticipation. However, what he did not expect was the little girl who had always been obedient to him, this time after hearing his words, shook her head at him for the first time. "It's over." Seeing the little fellow's performance, Chen Shi's heart sank. She thought about how the cabbage she had painstakingly planted had been eaten by the pig next door before it was time for it to bloom and bear fruit. At that moment, Chen Shi even had the urge to kill. It must be those bad kids who bullied Nyan for her ignorance. Otherwise, how could a child like her understand such things? Lousy school. I will tear it down tomorrow. As a kind and open-minded father, Chen Shi firmly believed that his daughter could still be saved. Therefore, he immediately tossed those inexplicable guesses to the back of his mind and exhaled deeply. Then, he put on an extremely solemn expression. No matter what, he had to make the little guy realize the seriousness of this problem today. However, just as Chen Shi was about to reprimand her, the little girl seemed to have suddenly thought of something and replied calmly, "I tore up the letter." "Torn?" Chen Shi was stunned. Then, he took the little girl into his arms and laughed excitedly, "My youngest daughter is sensible. Well done. Well done." Indeed, he had long heard that children nowadays were very mature. But he also did not expect to think that children nowadays would mature to such an extent. Nyan was only a little over 7 years old. Although she had skipped a grade and her classmates were generally 1 or 2 years older than her, they were still only 8 or 9 years old children. Don't you want to watch cartoons anymore? Not playing Mobile Legends? Actually had the leisure to come and flirt with his daughter? Fortunately, Nyan did not let him down. If it were not for the many parents at the school gate, Chen Shi was afraid that he would be so excited that he would shout to the sky, "Well done." Chen Shi was very satisfied with the little fellow's way of dealing with it. But on second thought, he could not help but feel a little worried. After all, the problem of puppy love was more serious than being unable to adapt to skipping a grade. Looking at the cute little girl in front of him, Chen Shi could not help but feel a little lost. How should he put it? In Chen Shi's eyes, Nyan was simply a child who did not even show any gender characteristics. Children were children. Children were not differentiated by gender. But now, someone had actually started to write a love letter to Nyan. Although Nyan tore the letter, this could only treat the symptoms and not the root cause. In fact, Shi was very clear in his heart. As the child continued to grow up, Nianyan's charm would only increase. Just like Ying in the past, the grown-up Nianyan only needed to stand there and it should be enough to attract the attention of all the opposite sex nearby. Now that the first love letter had appeared, there would definitely be a second one, a third one, and even countless of them. Then there was a problem. As a parent, what should he do? Even when he was besieged by the 4 immortals, Shi was not so nervous. He frowned tightly and kept telling himself not to think too much, but he still could not help but think of the worst. Some things, the more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. Shi frowned and didn't say anything. The little girl waited for a long time. After seeing that her father was still frowning, she tilted her head slightly and pondered. She was a very smart child and naturally knew what her father was worried about. Therefore, after hesitating for a moment, Nianyan took the initiative to hug Shi's neck and said softly, "Dad, don't worry, I won't fall in love at a young age." She subconsciously swallowed her saliva. He was still hesitating on how to bring it up, but he did not expect the little girl to take the initiative to mention this issue. A child who was just over 7 years old actually discussed the topic of puppy love with her parents. Such a scene, just thinking about it, would feel a little awkward and strange. "Nianyan, do you know what puppy love means?" "I know, there used to be a lot of people in our class who fell in love at a young age, but I didn't tell the teacher." "Really?" Shi was shocked. Obviously, the class that the little girl mentioned was the first year, second class. A first-year child learned how to fall in love. What was going on with this world? It had to be said that Shi's worldview was greatly impacted. But on second thought, he was a little relieved. The situation should not be as serious as he thought. After all, the information on the internet was too advanced now. The amount of information that children could obtain was far more than children in the 80s and 90s. Naturally, they would know more than children in the 80s and 90s. Falling in love was a popular word at the moment. Children were very curious, so naturally, they would learn this slightly novel way of getting along with each other from various channels. Coupled with the special nature of the school environment, it was not surprising that there were many young couples in a class under the vicious influence of spreading rumors. Chapter 507. I mean if... At this point, Shi could not help but pause. After hesitating for a moment, he nervously probed, "If you have someone you like in the future, you know what it means to like, right? It means that you really want to play with someone every day, and that person also likes to play with you. Will you fall in love early like other students?" For parents, this question was indeed a bit awkward. Children were not sensible. Their understanding of early love was naturally very different from the understanding of early love of adults. In fact, for children under the 4th grade to fall in love early, at most, it was a hazy good feeling. And this kind of good feeling was very easy to change. The child today liked A, tomorrow it might be B, and the day after tomorrow it might suddenly like C, who got first place in class. If A, B, and C were seen as toys, it was naturally easy to understand this problem. Children were both curious and liked to explore at the same time. Therefore, when encountering this kind of thing, it was best for parents not to be too agitated to the extent of going overboard. Correct guidance was the best way to solve the problem. As the saying goes, it is better to let go than to block. She tried to use a hypothetical method to let the little girl understand the disadvantages of early love. But what he did not expect was, as soon as he said his hypothesis, the little girl directly shook her head and then replied with a firm expression, "No. I won't like anyone, and I won't fall in love with anyone." Hearing this, she could not help but ask, "Are you so sure?" "Because they are too stupid. I don't like to play with them." Looking at the little girl's expression of disdain, she suddenly understood. So, she thought that her classmates were too stupid, so no one could enter her eyes at all? Although Wenwen and Mingming are also very stupid, but they have always been my best friends, so I don't dislike them. Also, I know what it means to like. If puppy love means 2 people are together all day long, then if I play with Wenwen and Mingming every day, isn't that also early love? We're not dating. We're good friends. So, Dad, your example is wrong. After hearing his daughter's reasonable rebuttal, Chen Shi couldn't help but be speechless. But on second thought, it was as if he had heard something happy. After laughing and shaking his head, he stretched out his neck and kissed the little fellow's face heavily. Moo-ah! The little fellow was preoccupied with expressing her views on puppy love. Suddenly, she was ambushed by Chen Shi and immediately forgot what she was going to say next. Daddy, you're so annoying. After saying that, the little thing buried its head in Chen Shi's shoulder, seemingly a little shy. Silly child, are you shy now? After today's conversation, Chen Shi finally realized Nian was really starting to grow up. Time is always relative. Now, let's rewind time to 1 month ago. After a period of hurrying, Cheng Hua and Ji successfully arrived at the Supreme Palace enclosure on the third day after they set off. Chen Shi didn't have the habit of showing off in front of children, so the two of them didn't know that Chen Shi had caused a ruckus in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven. They also didn't know that the Tuoba family had suffered heavy losses because of it. As the instigators of all this, the two brats only had the chance to visit home after leaving home for almost a year. Thus, just as the cloud-piercing shuttle flew into the sky above Ning province, Yi couldn't contain his excitement anymore. He jumped off the cloud-piercing shuttle and flew as fast as he could to the Dongfang family. He had already discussed with Cheng Hua beforehand. Everyone would go back to their own families and find their mothers. 3 days later, they would meet here and head back to Earth together. The three great families of Ning province were the Xinyuan family, the Dongfang family, and the Tuoba family. In terms of status, the two of them actually had very high positions in their families. But it was also because of this that the pressure they faced far exceeded that of their peers. Cheng Hua could be used as an example. His father was Genrio, one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. Since he was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family, Genrio's cultivation naturally wouldn't be weak. In reality, Genrio, who was in the early stage of soul formation, was already more than 800 years old. Immortal cultivators had long lifespans, but when it came to bearing children, they were far inferior to mortals. As the saying goes, the unseen world has its own will. Under the influence of the laws of heaven and earth, the higher one's cultivation, the lower their chances of bearing children. Genrio had 9 sons and 4 daughters in his life. Cheng Hua was Genrio's youngest child, and at the same time his last child. Cheng Hua's talent wasn't bad. In addition, Genrio had a child at an old age, so it was inevitable that he would especially spoil this youngest child. Logically speaking, Cheng Hua should have lived a very comfortable life since he was born in one of the 3 great families of Ning province and his father was one of the 8 great elders of the Xianyuan family. After all, he was a rich second generation. But it was a pity, reality was always slightly different from what outsiders imagined. In reality, Cheng Hua's life wasn't good at all. Cheng Hua's mother was called Zhang, and she came from a small family in Ning province. Because of her outstanding appearance, Genrio made an exception and took her in as a concubine. What needed to be understood here was how long a cultivator's life was. If one didn't have someone to accompany them on the long road, wouldn't their life be very lonely? Because of this, cultivators usually viewed status as extremely important. Even though Xianyuan Yuanliang had countless women, other than his first wife, First Madam, the only one who had a proper status with him was the second Madam Zhang. From this, it could be seen that Zhang was definitely not someone to be trifled with. However, although Zhang's methods were powerful, she was still a woman, so there were many things that Zhang couldn't decide. For example, Cheng Hua's eldest brother always used the excuse of training as an excuse to often throw Cheng Hua into an extremely dangerous place, and left him to fend for himself there. And this was the fundamental reason why Cheng Hua dared to recklessly enter the Tianshu ruins later on. As a mother, Zhang saw everything, but she couldn't think of any way to help her son, who asked Cheng Hua to only have one big brother left. Both of them were flesh and blood. In addition, his eldest brother always had a reasonable explanation, so Genryo wouldn't help his youngest son at all. Instead, he would think that his eldest son did the right thing. No matter how noble their birth was, cultivators would face all kinds of unexpected difficulties and crises in their lives. If they could make it through, it would be an opportunity. If they couldn't make it through, it would be fate. Everyone was already used to this. Changhua should have had many brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, most of his brothers and sisters had fallen. Now, only the powerful fifth brother and eighth sister, who had already married into the Dongfang family, were left. Genryo didn't want to be sad, so from the day Changhua was born, his fifth brother became the eldest brother, and his eighth sister became the second sister. Under normal circumstances, siblings should help each other and complement each other. Chenghua's family was an exception. If one had to use a word to describe the relationship between the two brothers, then this word must be, like strangers. Chapter 508. Chenghua's eldest brother was Genyuan Jingqi, who was over 300 years old this year. Ever since he broke through to Yuanying, Genyuan Jingqi had been given a position in the family as a steward. He was considered to have officially stepped into the core management of the Xianyuan family. It was important to note that any child with the blood of one of the three major families in their veins, regardless of whether they were from the main family or the side family, had to work hard to gain the family's approval. For anyone in the family, status had to be fought for. Since Genyuan Jingqi was able to step into Yuanying at the age of 300, at this rate, as long as nothing too big happened in the future, he would definitely have the opportunity to successfully inherit Genryo's legacy and become one of the 8 elders. What were the 8 elders? They were second only to one person and above everyone else. Seeing that his eldest son was so promising, Genryo naturally hoped that his youngest son could be as outstanding as his eldest son. Thus, after Changhua was born, Genryo handed over the task of educating him to Genyuan Jingqi. And this was the beginning of Chenghua's tragedy. Genyuan Jingqi didn't seem to like this little brother of his. After all, they weren't born from the same mother. When Changhua was still an infant, Genyuan Jingqi used the excuse of cleansing his meridians to soak Changhua in all sorts of strange potions. He even called it a medicinal bath. Zhang had secretly investigated this so-called medicinal bath. Based on the dregs of the medicine left behind, she could roughly confirm that the medicine inside was poisonous. Because of this, Zhang didn't hesitate to have a big argument with Genyuan Jingqi. She always felt that Chenghua's half-brother had ulterior motives. He might want to murder Changhua, so she didn't want Genyuan Jingqi to get close to Changhua. Zhang originally wanted to use this opportunity to completely drive Genyuan Jingqi away from Changhua. Who would have thought that when Genryo heard about this, he would only ask Genyuan Jingqi to show her the ancient book that recorded the formula of the medicinal bath, and then mercilessly scolded her. This ancient book was painstakingly obtained by Jingqi from the Jade Clear Cave Heaven. I have already checked it beforehand. The herbs used in the book seem to be poisonous, but in fact, the principle of using poison to fight poison is used. Therefore, the effect of the medicine is better than ordinary herbs. Jingqi is my child, and so is Changhua. Since they are brothers, why would Jingqi hurt Changhua for no reason? I think you are measuring the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Don't blame me for not reminding you. Chenghua's talent is slightly better than Jingqi's. If he ends up with nothing in the future, don't blame me for not caring about the relationship between husband and wife. Genryo was one of the 8 elders in the family, and also the head of the family. His words naturally carried a lot of weight. After this, Zhang lost the right to raise Changhua. Mother and son could only see each other on certain days. For the rest of the time, Changhua could only bitterly endure all kinds of inhumane torture in Genyuan Jingqi. Of course, Xianyuan Jingqi would never torture Changhua himself. He would only be like a god who was high up in the sky. He would give his younger brother all kinds of death-seeking missions, and he would call it training. Fortunately, no matter how difficult these experiences were, Changhua still managed to pull through in the end. As for the love and hate entanglement between Changhua and his older brother, I won't go into too much detail here. Let's get back to the main story first. Today was Zhang's birthday, which was also her 100th birthday. 100 years old. No matter how long a cultivator lived, how many hundred years could they live in their lifetime? What's more, for someone like Zhang who wasn't very talented, there was basically no hope of yuanning in this lifetime. If it had been someone else, they would have definitely thrown a big party when their birthday was coming to an end. Genrio originally planned to do this as well. After all, he was one of the 8 elders of the Xian Yuan family. Whenever there was a happy occasion in the family, even the head of the family would personally come to congratulate him. But it was a pity. Ever since Zhang found out that Chenghua had entered the Tianshu ruins, she shut herself in her room and refused to see anyone. Genrio originally wanted to take advantage of her birthday to comfort her, but he didn't expect that Zhang would mercilessly block him outside the room. Now that Huaer's life is uncertain, as his mother, I really don't have the leisure to do that. Please don't blame me. Genrio didn't force his way in, nor did he use his divine sense to probe the situation in the room. This was because he heard a trace of despair in Zhang's voice. That's right. Now that Chenghua's life was uncertain, how could Zhang still smile? Ever since the day Chenxi wreaked havoc in the Jade Clear Grotto heaven, everyone had a new understanding of the Tianshu ruins. Although the truth wasn't as mysterious as the legends, at least everyone knew that there was at least one supreme being living in there. What's more, this supreme being could even fight the 4 perfected masters of the Jade Clear Grotto heaven alone. Then, with his methods, could it be that he couldn't block the heart flame lamp senses? Therefore, even if Chenghua's heart flame lamp hadn't been extinguished, Genrio found it very hard to believe that Chenghua was still alive in this world. Sigh. After a deep sigh, Genrio could only silently turn around and leave. In order to not let anyone disturb Zhang, Genrio didn't forget to remind the servants not to let anyone take half a step into the courtyard after leaving. Now, he could only hope that Zhang could walk out of this shadow as soon as possible. After all, Genrio had lived for several hundred years and was already used to seeing life and death. Therefore, when he learned that Chenghua might never come back, he didn't appear too sad or emotional. It was impossible to say that he wasn't sad. But what was the use of being sad? As an immortal cultivator, Genrio had experienced too many life and death separations in his life. That old heart of his had long been numb. But it was precisely because his heart had long been numb that Genrio didn't know at all. This woman who had locked herself in her room all day because of the loss of her son, in such a state of despair, what terrible things would she do, in a dim room? Zhang sat quietly by the bed alone, holding an old ragdoll in her hand. This ragdoll was personally sewn for Chenghua. It was also Chenghua's favorite toy when he was young. Perhaps she was thinking of him when she saw it. Zhang gently stroked the ragdoll with her fingers as she softly muttered, "Don't worry. Mother has already reached an agreement with the Holy Church. Very soon, they will let Big Brother accompany you to the Tianshu ruins." Her voice was very soft, but the expression on her face was very strange. Sometimes she chuckled, sometimes she was sad. As if she was possessed, it gave people a horrifying and strange feeling. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor. Chapter 509. The first madam had passed away many years ago, so apart from Genrio, Zhang had the highest status in the family. However, so what if she had a high status? Genrio still thought that Zhang's cultivation was too low, and that she was not talented enough to guide Chenghua properly. That was why he had left Chenghua in the care of his eldest brother since he was young. But what happened in the end? Now that Chenghua's fate was unknown, Zhang naturally took it to heart. She felt that Chenghua was forced to his death by his eldest brother and father. Her son was forced to his death, so as Chenghua's mother, how could she continue to remain calm? One had to know that when a woman went crazy, she would not recognize her own family. To Zhang, although the Xian Yuan family was huge, there was nothing in it that she was reluctant to part with. Chenghua's trip to the Tianshu ruins could only end in death. As a result, Madame Zhang's heart was filled with hatred. She hated everyone, including Genryo. Just as she had said before, if something really happened to Chenghua, she would make sure that the entire Xianyuan family was buried with him. The Holy Church had already responded, so Zhang believed that her plan would come to fruition soon. Zhang silently planned. At this moment, a figure completely ignored Genryo's ban and forced his way into her courtyard. Genryo had set up a restriction on the entrance of the courtyard, allowing only people to leave and not enter. Thus, this person could only use all his strength to break through the restriction and try to force his way in. Soon, this commotion alerted the guards in the courtyard. Seeing that the guards were rushing over, the intruder turned around and shouted at them excitedly. "Open the restriction! I want to see my mother!" As soon as he appeared, the guards were stunned. He saw that this person was wearing a white short-sleeved shirt on his upper body and a pair of ripped jeans on his lower body. Coupled with his short hair, he looked somewhat out of place with the surrounding environment. His attire was a little strange. After careful observation, the guards finally dared to confirm that the person in front of them was the long-missing second young master. Second young master really came back. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up!" Seeing that everyone was hesitating, Chenghua no longer bothered with them. He looked around and found that the secret key to open the restriction was on one of the guards' waist. He walked over to the person and snatched the key. The guard instinctively wanted to stop him, but he was instantly intimidated by his fierce glare. How could this person not be the second young master? Seeing Chenghua swagger into the courtyard, the guard in charge of keeping the secret key seemed to have suddenly thought of something. He couldn't help but shiver. And then with a face full of excitement, he shouted, "Quick, report to the master. Second young master is back." Chenghua's return was like a stone heavily smashed into the water. As the restriction was opened, Zhang finally heard the commotion outside. She frowned and opened the door. Just as she was about to scold him, she unexpectedly saw the figure that made her worried the moment she raised her head. "Mother, I'm back." When Chenghua saw that Zhang had come out, he immediately knelt on the ground and bowed. At that moment, Zhang felt as if she was struck by lightning. She had an expression of disbelief on her face as she stood there in a daze for a full 3 seconds. Then, she subconsciously cried out in shock. "Mother, it's me. I'm back." "What? It's really you? Come here quickly, let Mother take a good look at you." The scene of mother and son reuniting after such a long time was really touching. Zhang quickly walked forward and helped Chenghua. Then, the mother and son hugged each other tightly. They were so emotional that they couldn't speak. After a long while, Zhang finally suppressed the excitement in her heart. Then, with a concerned expression, she asked, "Fortunately, the Immortal Emperor protected me. I didn't have to send off my son just now." After experiencing so many things on Earth, Chenghua had matured a lot. He had learned many things from Qin Shi, including kinship. How could Zhang not treat him as well as how Qin Shi treated Nian? How great and selfless was this kind of love? Every time he thought of this, Chenghua couldn't wait to rush back to the Supreme Palace enclosure. He only hoped that he could use his filial piety to comfort his mother's silent concern for him all these years. As the saying goes, a tree wants to be still, but the wind won't stop. A child wants to be raised, but his parents won't wait. Now he was finally back. "I'm unfilial and made Mother worry." It's fine. It's good that you're back." Zhang looked at Chenghua up and down. After making sure that he was not hurt, she asked happily, "Didn't you go to the Tianshu ruins?" Chenghua naturally understood what Zhang was worried about. So, he immediately smiled and replied, "Mother, I came back especially to celebrate your birthday." Zhang seemed to want to say something else. Seeing this, Chenghua directly held her arm and said with a smile, "Let's go. I'll help you back to the house first. Then, I'll tell you what happened in detail." The mother and son returned to the room. Then, under Zhang's incredulous gaze, Chenghua recounted his experience during this period of time in detail. "You mean, after you met Mr. Chen, not only did he not kill you, and he even took the initiative to accept you as his disciple?" After listening to Cheng Hua's story, the expression on Zhang Zhang's face was very interesting. Mr. Chen's prestige was now a gold-plated signboard in the Supreme Palace enclosure. Everyone said that the Tianshu ruins were a forbidden area and that trespassers would die. Who would have thought that Cheng Hua not only did not lose his life after trespassing into the Tianshu ruins, but also profited from the disaster and formed a good relationship with Mr. Chen. Mother, you might not understand. Mr. Chen did not accept me as his disciple. He only let me live in his house. When he was free, he would give me a few pointers. In order not to worry his mother, Cheng Hua concealed most of the facts. He did not mention Qin Xueqing at all, so Zhang Zhang mistakenly thought that he had been accepted as a disciple by Chen Shi. Even if it was only a few pointers, it was still pointers from Ji Zun. Mr. Chen is a peerless master who can defeat the 4 perfected masters alone. You've bumped into a great opportunity. Zhang Zhang was very excited. Who knew what kind of great luck Cheng Hua had had to be lucky enough to become Ji Zun's disciple? Looking at her son who was becoming more mature and steady, Zhang Zhang could not help but smile from the bottom of her heart. But immediately after, she seemed to have suddenly thought of something terrible, and a trace of worry flashed across her eyes. Cheng Hua's return was indeed a great thing. But what should she do with the Holy Church? Unilaterally break the contract? Would she dare? Thinking of this, Zhang Zhang's heart could not help but sink, and she instantly became a little worried. Cheng Hua was immersed in the joy of reuniting with his mother, so he did not notice the strange look on Zhang Zhang's face. He thought that Zhang Zhang was blaming him for trespassing on the Tianshu ruins, so he was thinking of something to say to make his mother happy. But at this moment, there was a sudden commotion outside the courtyard. A large group of people was seen hurrying towards Zhang Zhang's room. The leader was Zhenrio. Other than Cheng Hua's elder brother, Zhenyuan Jingqi, who was with him, there was also the current head of the Xianyuan family, Xianyuan Wang. Chapter 5:10. Outside the courtyard, the head of the family and the 8 elders arrived together. From this, it could be seen how shocking the news of Cheng Hua coming back alive from the Tianshu ruins was. Where is he? Xianyuan Wang looked to be about 60 years old. He was wearing an exquisite dark green robe with a simple jade pendant hanging from his waist. It was obvious that he was the one with the highest status in the group. This was Zhenrio's courtyard. Although Xianyuan Wang was the head of the family, the servants did not recognize him. After all, there was no television in the Supreme Palace enclosure. The guard didn't know Xianyuan Wang, but he vaguely recognized a few of the 8 elders. Therefore, when he heard Xianyuan Wang's seemingly random question, the guard was stunned. He didn't know how to answer at all. Seeing this, Zhenrio immediately walked out from the back of the group and quickly scolded in a low voice. Fool, the head of the family is asking you a question. Why aren't you answering? Where did Cheng Hua go? After hearing the head of the family scolding, the guard replied with a look of realization. Master, the second young master has been staying in the second madam's room ever since he came back. He did not go anywhere. All right, get out of here. The Xianyuan family was very large. If one had to describe it, the Xianyuan family could be considered a county. The head of the family was the county head, and the 8 elders were the mayors of the various towns. Now that the county head was here, it was understandable that the servants were slightly negligent. Although Zhenrio was very impressive all day, in front of the head of the family, he was very much like a bootlicker who only knew how to nod his head and bow his head. And this was the specialty of the Supreme Palace enclosure. That was the feudal hierarchy. Under the rules of this system, the head of the family's authority could not be challenged. Fortunately, Xianyuan Wang seemed to be in a good mood today. Therefore, after hearing the guard's answer, Xianyuan Wang did not show any intention of blaming him. After casually waving his hand, he strode into the courtyard. When his entourage saw this, they all followed behind him and swarmed into the courtyard like a swarm of bees. At this time, Cheng Hua also heard the commotion outside the house. After signaling his mother not to get up, he walked to the door and pushed it open. At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on him. This was Zhenrio's youngest son. Xinyuan Chenghua. A little brat who hadn't even had a coronation ceremony. If not for the fact that Chenghua had returned alive from the Tianshu ruins, most of the people present would have forgotten that Genryo had such an outstanding son. Why aren't you kneeling down? According to the customs of the Supreme Palace enclosure, a crowning ceremony would be held at the age of 20, which was the so-called coming-of-age ceremony. Before the crowning ceremony was held, juniors like Chenghua did not even have the right to step into the ancestral hall of the clan. In the past, during the clan meeting, Chenghua often ran outside with his peers to peek at the meeting. Therefore, he knew the head of the family and the other elders. Therefore, after hearing Genryo's reminder, Chenghua immediately stopped on the steps and then bowed to the people in the courtyard. He clasped his fist and bowed. Chenghua is here to greet the head of the family, father, and elders. There was nothing wrong with Chenghua's words. However, his behavior was obviously very problematic. In front of the head of the family, as a junior, how could Chenghua not kneel? This was a great crime of disrespect. Genryo saw all of this, but as a father, he could only be anxious at the side and did not dare to say anything to remind him. Could it be that he had to remind the head of the family to punish Chenghua for his great disrespect? Genryo was very anxious in his heart. That was because he did not know that Chenghua had changed. Chenghua had been by Qinshi's side for too long and had also lived for a long time in modern society. Therefore, unknowingly, Chenghua's understanding of this world had undergone a great change. The two of them are also human, everyone is equal, it's just a meal, what's the big deal? Come, sit down and eat together, try my cooking. Qin Shueqing did not allow the two of them to take half a step into the inner courtyard, but Qinshi opened his mouth and let the two of them directly sit at the dining table. This was just a small matter, but this small matter left an extremely deep impression on Chenghua. From the daily diet to the leisure time, Qinshi's every move affected him and he almost all the time. The reason why they did not notice anything unusual in the past was that the two of them had not returned to the Supreme Palace enclosure yet. It was also because of this that when Chenghua returned this time, he realized that he seemed to be somewhat out of tune with the things around him. It was not that he did not know etiquette. It was purely that he did not want to kneel. Why are you kneeling? Stand up, haven't you heard that men have gold under their knees? Stand up straight for me. At this moment, Chenghua's mind was filled with a myriad of thoughts. So much so that he even started to miss Earth. Xinyuan Wang did not know what Chenghua was thinking. Moreover, he did not know what Chenghua was thinking at all. Yuanliang, lead the way. Let's talk somewhere else. Xinyuan Wang came here today with a purpose, so he did not want to waste too much time on these trivial matters. At his command, the master let Genryo lead everyone to sit in the main hall of the courtyard one by one. After that, in front of everyone present, Chenghua repeated everything he had just said to Zhang. His reaction was more or less the same as Zhang's. After everyone heard that Chenghua had been living in Mr. Chen's house all this time, the expressions on their faces were as interesting as it could be. After Chenghua roughly recounted his experience, he stood to the side and quietly waited for the master to ask questions. After pondering for a while, the master frowned and asked softly, "In other words, Mr. Chen has already taken you in?" It was no wonder that everyone understood this. After all, the Supreme Palace enclosure was not Earth. Other than Qinshi, who would take a captive in their own house and provide them with good food and drinks. Master, Mr. Qin did not take me in as a disciple. He just let me live in his house and gave me a few pointers when he was free. Chenghua tried his best to explain. Hearing this, Xinyuan Wang replied with a look of sudden realization, "I think it's because your cultivation levels are too low. Mr. Chen was afraid that you two would embarrass him, so he didn't give you a master and disciple status. If that's the case, you really can't claim to be his disciple." As soon as this was said, the 8 elders suddenly seemed to have figured something out. They could not help but nod in agreement. "Master, you're right." Seeing that this misunderstanding was getting bigger and bigger, Chenghua hesitated for a moment. but in the end, he forced himself to swallow the words that had already been on the tip of his tongue. Anyway, there was nothing wrong with being Mr. Chen's disciple. Since everyone had to understand it this way, he could only let it be. At worst, he would go back and explain it to Mr. Chen properly. Anyway, he did not use Mr. Chen's name to swindle people everywhere. Cheng Hua believed that he had a clear conscience, so he did not dwell on this issue any longer. Since Xianyuan Wang had asked what he wanted to ask and understood what he needed to understand, Cheng Hua guessed that it was time for them to leave, so he tactfully excused himself and left the main hall. Of course, he did not go far. Instead, he waited silently outside the house so that he could send the elders off later. Cheng Hua stood outside the door and waited, bored to death. However, at this moment, his name suddenly rang out in the main hall. Yuan Liang, you really have a good son. This child is called Cheng Hua, right? What are his birth characters? Is he betrothed now? Coincidentally, I have a niece. She's 16 years old and has yet to be betrothed. I wonder, Yuan Liang, are you willing to become my in-laws? At that moment, Cheng Hua felt as if a basin of cold water had been poured over him from head to toe. Before Genrio could even open his mouth to reply, he rushed into the main hall as if he had been electrocuted. Then, in front of the master, he shouted at everyone, "No!" Chapter 511. Cheng Hua's sudden intrusion instantly interrupted everyone's conversation. Looking at his nervous and agitated expression, the patriarch did not directly reprimand him for his lack of manners. Instead, he asked with a smile, "Why not?" At that moment, everyone's eyes were focused on Cheng Hua. That's right, why not? As the cultivation of an immortal cultivator increased, the probability of having children would gradually decline. Therefore, immortal cultivators would usually try to get married and have children as soon as possible before they made a major breakthrough in their cultivation, so as to avoid the tragedy of having no one to send them off in the future. Even young people like Cheng Hua, who had not yet had a coronation ceremony, were mostly already married at this age. The meaning of life was to reproduce and multiply. In the words of the ancient people, there were 3 ways to be unfilial, and the worst was to have no descendants. Because his eldest brother, Genyuan Jingqi, had already gotten married and had 2 sons, Genrio did not urge Cheng Hua to get married and have children. He had originally planned to wait until after Cheng Hua's coronation ceremony to find a good family for Cheng Hua. Who would have thought that, after Cheng Hua's trip to the Tianshu ruins, he had become a hot commodity in everyone's eyes. In addition to a few elders who expressed their desire to become in-laws with him, it seemed that even the patriarch had this intention. Since ancient times, regardless of the social system, marriage was the most common way to establish relations. Since Cheng Hua had the title of supreme disciple, wouldn't a marriage alliance with him mean that they would suddenly have a huge backer behind them? Even if they accidentally provoked the 4 great spiritual masters of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven in the future, the 4 great spiritual masters would probably be a little more lenient on account of Great Supreme Master Qin. Therefore, even if Cheng Hua's behavior was a little rude, no one had the intention to blame him. Instead, they smiled and sized up Cheng Hua. After hearing the patriarch's question, Cheng Hua could not help but be stunned. He did not know why he objected to this suggestion. After all, cultivators were different from mortals. It would not be an exaggeration to describe the life of an immortal cultivator as a wandering and magnificent life. For immortal cultivators, the concept of home was more like an organization that they could rely on, since a man could have 3 wives and 4 concubines. In other words, a woman could naturally have 3,000 male companions. The so-called love was stronger than gold and unswerving until death. This kind of thing did not work in the Supreme Palace enclosure at all. Cheng Hua hesitated, not knowing how to answer the patriarch's question. Seeing this, the clan head laughed and said, "Could it be that you already have someone in mind? Which family are you from? If you don't mind, this old man can be a matchmaker for you." After hearing the patriarch's words, Cheng Hua couldn't help but think of a cold and aloof figure. However, as that figure became clearer and clearer in his mind, Chung Hua couldn't help but shudder. Then he quickly replied, "Thank you for your concern, Patriarch. It's not like I have someone in mind, it's just that. At this point, Chung Hua couldn't help but pause for a moment. Then, as if he suddenly thought of something, he couldn't help but quickly add, "It's just that I haven't reached the age of one yet. That's why I haven't considered the personal matters of my children before. Now that I've suddenly heard the elders mention this matter, I can't help but feel a little uneasy in my heart. I hope the elders won't blame me." Since they were talking about marriage, Chung Hua naturally had to act like a junior. Anyway, they were all family. There was nothing wrong with him calling himself the grandson in front of the patriarch. Using the reason that he was underage, Chung Hua tactfully rejected the good intentions of the elders. But what he didn't expect was, after hearing his words, the patriarch still laughed and said, "The coronation ceremony is just a kind of ceremony. It just so happens that tomorrow is the 15th of the first lunar month. When the time comes, come to the ancestral temple and this old man will personally crown you. How about it?" Because there were too many people in the Xian Yuan family, the coronation ceremony didn't happen immediately after the age of 20. Instead, it had to be done in batches. Usually, it would be chosen at an auspicious time, and the elders and deacons would perform the ceremony for the juniors. The higher the status of the person in the family, the more grand the coronation ceremony would be. For Chung Hua to have the patriarch personally crown him in the ancestral temple was already a privilege that only the direct bloodline of the Xian Yuan family could enjoy. Genrio relied on his cultivation to become one of the 8 elders. So, in terms of bloodline, Chung Hua was far from being qualified to enter the ancestral temple. Therefore, it could be said that the patriarch of the Xian Yuan family was giving Chen Shi enough face. Seeing that the patriarch had said so, the elders all nodded in agreement. Seeing this, Chung Hua seemed to be a little unwilling to give up and said, "When I left Tianshu, I promised Mr. Chen that I would only be back for 7 days. So this marriage," Chung Hua struggled hard. However, before he could finish his words, the patriarch interrupted him. "7 days? That's enough. When your wedding is over, I'll send someone to escort you all the way back to Tianshu. How about that? Let's settle this matter then. Yuan Liang, I'll leave this matter to you. Tomorrow morning, I'll perform the coronation ceremony for your good son at the ancestral temple." There was no room for negotiation at all. After saying this, the patriarch left the courtyard with his people. Only a dumbfounded Chung Hua was left behind, as well as his excited old father. Coronation ceremony, marriage. At the same time, the status of the family rose sharply. Ever since Chung Hua and Iji returned home, everything they experienced was so similar. The Tuoba family had already fallen. So, how could the Xian Yuan family and the Dongfang family, who were also the 3 major families of Ningzhou, not be prepared at all? No matter what the relationship between the 2 of them and Mr. Chen. In short, it would not be wrong to please the 2 of them. Therefore, after the 2 of them went through a series of friendly greetings, they were pushed into the ancestral temple in a daze under the gaze of thousands of people. From the moment the 2 patriarchs personally held the coronation ceremony for the 2 of them, Chung Hua and Iji officially set foot on the peak of their lives. It felt like a dream. Everything came so suddenly. In a daze, the 2 teenagers were in their own ancestral temples. At the same time, they put on the red and black crowns that were unique to adults. The ceremony is complete. Bow to the ancestors. As the ceremony was completed, there was a burst of lively cheers outside the ancestral temples of the Xian Yuan and Dongfang families. People couldn't help but cheer for the crowns. It was as if there was only joy left in the world. However, no one would have thought, just as the 2 of them were about to complete their coronation ceremony, an earth-shattering sound suddenly came from the horizon. Boom! In an instant, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Evil wind blew. Chapter 5:12. The sudden turn of events alarmed everyone. The sun was still shining brightly earlier, but in the blink of an eye, the sky in the distance had become so gloomy that it was about to rain. Seeing that a storm was about to come, the people outside the ancestral temple could not help but whisper to each other. "What's going on? The weather is so abnormal. Did something big happen in the jade clear grotto heaven?" Like the Great World, there were no stars near the Supreme Palace enclosure, so the changes in the weather and the movement of the sun and moon were all controlled by the formation. The core of the Supreme Palace enclosure's formation was in the jade clear grotto heaven. Now that the weather had suddenly changed, the first reaction of the people present was to guess if something had happened in the jade clear grotto heaven. Thick black clouds covered the entire sky, and the sky was as dark as ink that had dripped into water. Looking from afar, the black clouds surged over one after another, like the ferocious and terrifying faces of monsters. Like the low growl of a vicious dog before it pounced on its prey, the thunder in the sky accumulated power for a while before it suddenly burst out with an earth-shattering sound. Rumble! Rumble! In an instant, the thunder rumbled and the wind howled. In front of such a terrifying scene, no one had any intention of hiding. Instead, they all looked up at the distant sky. In the ancestral temple. The moment Xianyuan Wuang heard the thunder, he stopped the warning and blessing he was about to say to Chenghua. Instead, he quickly walked out of the ancestral temple with a serious face. When the 8 elders saw this, they all followed behind him and walked out of the ancestral temple. Chenghua was supposed to be the main character of today's ceremony. However, the moment the thunder sounded, he completely became a side character that no one cared about. Seeing that no one cared about him, Chenghua did not bother to care about the complicated etiquette. He directly took off the white crown on his head and hugged it in his arms. Then he quietly moved to Genrio's side. "Father, did something big happen?" The patriarch and the 8 grand elders stood proudly on the steps facing the demonic wind. After hearing Chenghua's question, Genrio frowned and glared at him. He then quickly scolded him in a low voice, "Silence." "Oh, okay." Chenghua had never seen such a scene before. Therefore, when he heard Genrio's reprimand, he could only shrink his head in confusion and obediently stand behind the crowd, not daring to make any noise. Rumble! Rumble! The sound of rolling thunder reverberated in the air. One after another, there was not a single moment of rest. It lasted for about 2 minutes before the deafening thunder gradually subsided. "What's going on?" Like Chenghua, most of the young people outside the ancestral temple had blank looks on their faces. They had no idea what had just happened. Chenghua stole a glance at his father. He realized that his father's expression was somewhat strange. There was a hint of nervousness, excitement, and even a hint of excitement. Could it be something good was about to happen? In the past, Chenghua would not have the right to stand on the steps outside the ancestral temple. Today, he had a rare opportunity to do so. Naturally, he wanted to experience the feeling of standing at the top. However, at this moment, the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders, who were standing at the front, suddenly knelt on one knee and shouted in unison, "Yes, Zhenren." Seeing this, Chenghua was stunned. This was because he had no idea what had just happened. Seeing the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders kneeling on the ground, Chenghua was stunned for a moment. He could only follow suit and kneel down immediately. However, the moment he knelt down, the patriarch of the Xianyuan family and the 8 grand elders stood up again. This was great. Chenghua did not know whether he should kneel or stand now. Forget it. This is fate. It can't be changed. Yuan Liang, explain to this child first. If Mr. Chen wants to blame someone in the future, I don't think he will be the one to blame. The dark clouds in the sky did not disperse, and the thunder stopped. The patriarch of the Xianyuan family looked at Chenghua with a complicated expression and shook his head gently. Then he led the rest of the elders back to the ancestral temple. Explain? Explain what? Hearing this, Chenghua could not help but feel confused. He was about to ask when Genrio's voice suddenly rang in his head. It was a voice transmission. His father was transmitting a voice transmission to him. After listening to Genrio's explanation, Chenghua finally understood what had just happened. So, the thunder just now was not a natural phenomenon. It was caused by the thunder drum of the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. The so-called thunder drum was a special method used by the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven to transmit information to the various forces in the Supreme Palace enclosure. It was roughly equivalent to the radio station on Earth, and it was the encrypted kind. Only when one's cultivation reached a certain level could they hear the message that the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven wanted to transmit from the thunder. The reason why the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven suddenly sounded the thunder drum today was completely because a grand event that happened once in 100 years was coming. What was a grand event? The meeting of the three enclosures was a grand event. Changhua had heard many rumors about the three enclosures since he was young. The so-called three enclosures were the Supreme Palace enclosure, the Crepe Myrtle enclosure, and the Heavenly Market enclosure. Legend had it that a long time ago, the three enclosures were originally a complete planet. Nobody would have thought, after hearing Genrio's words, Changhua said hesitantly, "Father, can I not participate?" "What?" Genrio looked as if he had seen a ghost. It should be noted that the reason why Chenghua's elder brother did not enter the great illusionary realm back then was that there was no third spot, so he could only stay in the top three. Now that there was an extra spot, Chenghua actually wanted to give it up directly? Was there a mistake? Thinking of this, Genrio only felt a surge of anger in his heart rushing to his head. However, considering that this matter could not be forced, after taking a deep breath, Genrio forced himself to calm down and said, "Why don't you want to participate?" "Mr. Chen only gave me 7 days." Seeing his father's unfriendly expression, Chenghua could only answer honestly, "After 7 days, I must return to Tianshu, otherwise, with Mr. Chen's temperament, it's very likely that he will personally come to the Supreme Palace enclosure to ask me to return." After hearing the 3 words, Mr. Chen, Genrio's eyelids twitched obviously. With the Toba family as an example, nobody dared to provoke Mr. Chen in Tianshu. However, was this really going to be a waste of this opportunity? You have to think carefully. Some people are willing to waste 100 years and force themselves to stay in this realm with the purpose of exploring the great illusionary land. Although you are a disciple of a supreme being, what Mr. Chen can give you may not be as much as what the great illusionary land can give you. When the 4 words, Great Illusionary Land, were mentioned, Genrio's face clearly flashed with a strange light. However, due to some unspoken agreement, he could not tell Chenghua what exactly was in the Great Illusionary Land. Moreover, are you so sure that you can easily win the first place and obtain a spot to enter the Great Illusionary Land? After hearing Genrio say this, Chenghua was stunned for a moment. That's right. Ever since he found out that he had to compete to obtain a spot, Chenghua's first reaction was that he could not participate. Otherwise, if he did not return to Tianshu on time, Mr. Chen would definitely be angry. In Chenghua's subconscious mind, as long as he participated in the clan meeting, then he would definitely be able to defeat everyone and successfully obtain the qualification to enter the Great Illusionary Land. He seemed to be a little too confident. Chapter 5:14. Due to the lack of time, the Patriarch immediately announced the start of the Great Clan meeting after receiving the news from the Jade Clear Grotto Heaven. This was a grand event that concerned the future of the Xian Yuan family. In this grand event, regardless of whether it was the Xian Yuan family's collateral bloodline, or the relatives who were related to the Xian Yuan family through marriage, or even some criminals who had violated the family rules, regardless of birth or background. As long as one's cultivation was above the Golden Core stage and below the Yuanying stage, one would be qualified to participate in the Great Clan meeting. Of course, most people did not know what the Great Clan meeting meant because the Great Illusionary Realm was too far away for them. But even so, everyone wanted to do their best in this Great Clan meeting and strive to get a good ranking. This grand event was not only related to the Great Illusionary Realm, but also related to everyone's status in the family. Just like how ancient emperors would always pardon the world before they ascended the throne, at this moment, it did not matter whether one was born poor or guilty. As long as they could get a good ranking in the great clan meeting, they could use this opportunity to reverse their previous fate. It could be said that this was the true meaning. The fish leaped over the dragon's gate, and the sky was vast. Therefore, the great clan meeting was actually equivalent to Hua Xia's college entrance exam. It was even fairer than the college entrance exam. Everything depended on one's strength. Qin Xueqing had never been to the great palace enclosure, so she did not know how much time would be wasted on the journey from Earth to the great palace enclosure. The so-called 7-day deadline was just something she said casually. Regarding this, Qin Shi was more magnanimous. Considering the long journey, when Cheng Hua and Yi left, he even very considerately reminded them that the 7-day deadline would start from the day they reached home. Today was the second day after Cheng Hua's return. He originally wanted to go home and accompany his mother, but he did not expect that as soon as he got home, his schedule would be packed. He really did not have a moment to rest. Under Genrio's constant persuasion, Cheng Hua finally signed up for the great clan meeting after some hesitation. After all, it was rare for the clan gathering to be held, so he wanted to use this opportunity to see how much he had improved. If he didn't make any progress, he really wouldn't have the face to see Qin Shi. Under the constant urging of the patriarch, the efficiency of the stewards in the clan instantly rose to the highest level. Therefore, in less than half a day's time, this highly anticipated clan gathering ushered in its first competition. Unlike many of the spectators, Cheng Hua did not show any excitement on his face. Instead, he stood beside the ring with a calm expression, silently watching the two parties fighting on the ring. It was as if everything had nothing to do with him. What we need to take note of here is, although the entry requirements were limited to those above the Golden Core stage and below the Yuanying stage, there was no age limit. The strength of an Aurus Core stage cultivator who had cultivated for 100 years and an Aurus Core stage cultivator who had cultivated for 500 years were naturally incomparable. Because of this, many of the old fellows who had been cultivating bitterly for their entire lives but were still unable to enter the Yuanying realm were extremely excited when they heard that the clan leader was going to hold a clan meeting. As long as they could achieve a certain result in the meeting, the clan would definitely notice them. At that time, wouldn't the Yuanying stage be just around the corner? Everyone wanted to do their best for their own future, so the ruthlessness of this clan meeting was far beyond everyone's expectations. Perhaps it was because they wanted to eliminate the weak as soon as possible. Therefore, in the previous few competitions, there was no real sense of parity. Instead, most of the time, it was peak Aurus Core stage cultivators against early Aurus Core stage cultivators. Such a deliberate arrangement not only ensured that the peak Aurus Core stage cultivators could enter the final round with the strongest form, but also eliminated the weak as quickly as possible. However, what was surprising was that, even if it was always early Aurus Core stage cultivators against peak Aurus Core stage cultivators, there had never been a situation where the early Aurus Core stage cultivators gave up without a fight. There were even a few times when the early Aurus Core stage cultivators almost made a comeback. So what if they were peak Aurus Core stage cultivators? It was just a battle. What was there to be afraid of? Regardless of their cultivation level, everyone gave it their all in order to obtain a better ranking for themselves. If it wasn't for the clan meeting's explicit prohibition against self-detonating magic treasures, it was estimated that the arena would have been filled with crackling sounds. When night fell, Cheng Hua finally welcomed his first battle. His cultivation was at the middle Aurus Core stage. Now that even he was on the stage, it meant that the early Aurus Core stage cultivators had basically been eliminated, and it was time for the middle Aurus Core stage cultivators. Cheng Hua's opponent was an elder from a collateral branch. Because the news of Cheng Hua going to the Tianshu ruins was not publicized, most people did not know that he now had another identity. But even if he did not have the identity of the supreme disciple, Cheng Hua was still Genrio's second son. So when he just appeared, it caused a big commotion. Chapter 5:15. Changhua had also consulted Chen Shi many times when he was in a good mood regarding cultivation. Chen Shi was a supreme martial artist, so his answers were unquestionable truth to Changhua. There were 8 methods of immortals, pills, talismans, weapon arrays, and witchcraft. Earth originally lacked the corresponding inheritance and materials, so there were very few rare and strange magic treasures. Even if there were 1 or 2, most of them were old antiques passed down from ancient times. The Supreme Palace enclosure was different from Earth. It had not experienced many changes, so compared to Earth, which lacked the inheritance of the 8 methods, the Supreme Palace enclosure was actually more like the United States, where weapons were not banned. Magic treasures were just consumer goods that could be seen everywhere. This was the reason why Qin Xueqing did not like to use magic treasures. On one hand, it was because she entered the Tao through martial arts, and her body was her most powerful weapon. On the other hand, it was completely because she had never come into contact with magic treasures. Since she had never come into contact with them, how could she understand the benefits? If it was normal that Qin Xueqing did not like to use magic treasures, then Chen Shi, who also did not like to use magic treasures, was obviously a little abnormal. Changhua had always thought that if the Phoenix Perch Scorchtail box was still in his hands, Qin Xueqing could not possibly be his opponent. Therefore, after he was beaten up by Qin Xueqing, he had a discussion with Chen Shi about whether magic treasures were important or not. The result was naturally very obvious. From then on, Changhua was infected with the bad habit of not liking to use magic treasures. In fact, with Chen Shi's current cultivation, if he really wanted to obtain a magic treasure that suited him, it would not be difficult at all. He did not even need to spend much effort to find the materials. He only needed to take a stroll in the Jade Clear Cave Heaven with the title of Supreme Martial Artist Tianshu. There were so many treasures in there, so why couldn't he just casually pick one? As long as it was not some sect-guarding treasure, would the 4 perfected masters not even give this little face? So in the end, it was just that Chen Shi himself did not want it. Just like the words he always said, there is no other reason other than the sword in your heart. Magic treasures were indeed very useful. Some magic treasures were even more powerful than the cultivator's own strength. But even so, what could they do? No matter how strong the magic treasure in his hand was, this power was still just an external force. Personal strength was the foundation of an immortal cultivator. Blindly pursuing the grade of magic treasures and neglecting one's own strength, wasn't such behavior already inferior? You don't understand? It's fine. Let me ask you the simplest question. Didn't you have a 9th grade spirit treasure previously? If the current you with your bare hands were to face the you who used to have a 9th grade spirit treasure, then do you think, which period would you be more powerful? With that, Chen Shi smiled mysteriously and patted Chenghua's shoulder. This scene also left a deep impression on Changhua. Actually, this thing is just like dating. The one that suits you is the best. Though the Phoenix Perch Scorchtail box is good, it does not suit you. Also, if you rely too much on external forces, other than being able to kill a few more people, it does not help your cultivation at all. So, before you truly find a Dharma treasure that suits you, I suggest that you be yourself first. After Chen Shi's advice, Changhua finally understood. This sword, it was both in his hand and in his heart. When he did not have a sword in his hand, it was time for him to take out the sword in his heart. No magic treasures. After hearing Chenghua's words, the elder's eyes flashed with joy. One had to know that the competition schedule of the clan gathering was very tight. The competition was basically one after another. There was not enough time to rest and recuperate. If he went through a fierce battle right after he appeared, then even if he could successfully enter the final round, his performance would be greatly reduced. And if he could obtain victory at the lowest cost and then face opponents of the same level in his peak state, his chances of winning would naturally increase by 30%. To the elder, the clan gathering was the only chance for him to make a comeback. Therefore, just as Changhua finished speaking, the elder pretended to be in a difficult position and replied, "Since young master is so confident, I can only accept your favor." "Young master, be careful. I am about to make my move." This move is called Wave Fanyan. Please enlighten me, young master. Even though the old man was calling himself a young master, the long saber in his hand danced with vigor and vigor. Although this move was called Wave Fanyan, it had nothing to do with water. As he waved the long saber in his hand, a streak of fire covered half of the arena like a cloud in the evening. This brat! How can he be so careless? In midair, seeing the elder attack with all his might, Genryo was so angry that he trembled. Middle stage golden elixir against peak stage golden elixir. His opponent had clearly allowed him to make the first move, but Changhua insisted on being careless. Not only did he not use his Dharma treasure, he even allowed the elder to make the first move. What was this if not courting death? If not for the clan leader beside him, Genryo would have even appeared and reprimanded Changhua. Genryo was extremely anxious, but the clan leader was extremely calm. It was unknown whether he had confidence in Changhua or in Great Supreme Qin. In short, when the clan leader saw Genryo fidgeting, he immediately waved his hand and calmly comforted him. Yuan Liang, don't be anxious. Let's watch first. The result was just as the clan leader expected. Just when everyone thought that Changhua would be defeated by the elder in one move, Changhua made his move. They saw, in the face of the raging flames that covered the sky, Changhua did not retreat. Instead, he moved forward. In an instant, like a bullet, he passed through the sea of flames and came to the elder's side at the fastest speed. Before the elder could even react, Chenghua's fist brought along a strong gust of wind and smashed towards his head. A long punch from a distance and a short punch from close range. At that moment, not only did the elder not react, even the clan leader and the 8 elders who were watching from the side were stunned. Was this the move that Changhua learned from the Supreme Qin? Why did this move seem so strange? Bang! With a muffled sound, Chenghua's fist made close contact with the elder's forehead. Changhua had been preparing for this punch for a long time. Previously, when he stood still, he seemed to be careless. In fact, he had been observing the elder's aura and flaws. Lang Fanyun? The name sounded nice, but the move was flashy and impractical. Although the flames in the sky looked scary, the real threat to Changhua was the long saber hidden in the flames. Therefore, Changhua only needed to find the path of the saber and successfully avoid it. Naturally, he could easily come to the elder's side. As a result, under everyone's dumbfounded expression, Chenghua's fists were like a storm, crazily smashing on the old man's protective shield. Bang! 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 Chapter 5:16. Punching the Nanshan nursing home and kicking the Beihai kindergarten. Wasn't such an absurd and ridiculous scene happening right in front of everyone's eyes? Changhua had almost perfectly inherited Qin Xueqing's lifelong learning. Therefore, as soon as this move, which was very characteristic of Earth, appeared, it immediately caused a big sensation in the crowd. Since the day the 3 enclosures split apart, no one had ever seen such a shameless and strange move. Shouldn't the so-called immortal cultivators be like the immortals in the myths and legends, walking, sitting, and lying, showing the true colors of immortals? Immortals couldn't be like street gangsters, chasing each other with clubs and machetes, right? Therefore, when immortal cultivators fought with each other, most of them would only use magic treasures or spells to fight from a long distance. Here, ancient military formations could be used as an example. In a war, it wasn't just about which side had more people. If the cultivation of immortal cultivators was compared to the number of soldiers, then the magic treasures and moves they used when fighting were the tactical strategies arranged by the commander of the military formation. On the battlefield, the situation was changing rapidly. There were always many factors that could affect the outcome of a battle. Even if one side had few soldiers and was far less powerful than the opponent, before the real fight, no one could guarantee that the weak side would lose. The family had hoped that Changhua could bring him a certain surprise. But what he never expected was, Changhua not only brought him a surprise, but also a certain degree of surprise. Even if Cheng Hua had used tricks such as straw boats to borrow arrows and fire to achieve a narrow victory, the family head wouldn't be surprised at all. After all, Cheng Hua was the disciple of the Supreme Being. However, Cheng Hua had used a completely unimaginable way to win the battle in a one-sided manner. My younger brother, Zhang Yida, took the head of a general among millions of soldiers as easily as taking something out of his pocket. He single-handedly attacked the enemy's den. This was Cheng Hua's tactic. There weren't so many flashy moves, and there weren't so many strange movements. There were only punches to the flesh, as well as repeated attacks that accurately hit the same position. And under this storm-like attack, soon, the old man's protective shield was broken. Boom! A strong gust of wind suddenly rose from the stage, and the old man's body was like a sandbag filled with cement, heavily smashing into the stage. From beginning to end, this unlucky peak Jindan stage cultivator had never fought back even once. On one hand, it was because the rules of the competition forbade the use of defensive treasures. On the other hand, it was completely because he didn't react in time. Cough, cough. Young master, you're so capable. This old man admits defeat. Looking at the expressionless Cheng Hua, the old man hesitated for a moment before shaking his head with a bitter smile. This was an arena competition. Methods such as self-detonating his golden core and burning his blood essence could not be used. Therefore, the moment the protective shield was broken, the old man had already lost the chance to make a comeback. Unless Cheng Hua was willing to give him time to adjust his breathing and wait until he was ready to fight again. Otherwise, if he continued to hold on, what awaited the old man was destined to be humiliation. Thank you for letting me win. Hearing the old man admit defeat, Cheng Hua cupped his fists and bowed to him, then slowly walked down the stage. When the audience below the stage saw Cheng Hua come down, they immediately divided into two lines and made a VIP passage for him. At that moment, the entire audience was silent. The crowd silently watched Cheng Hua. After his figure gradually disappeared into the distance, the crowd was like startled birds in the forest, and began to discuss excitedly. What's going on? He won just like that? A middle Jindan stage cultivator against a peak Jindan stage cultivator, and he won so easily? What kind of moves did they use? Did you understand? Why do I feel like I didn't see anything? Looking at the audience below who were fiercely discussing the battle situation, Xianyuan Wuwang suddenly couldn't help but laugh. Ha, Yuanliang, your second son is really lucky. After saying that, without waiting for Genrio to reply, the family head had already left with an enigmatic smile on his face. Genrio looked at the stage below thoughtfully, but he suddenly had more expectations for this precious son of his. This was the move that the Supreme Being taught? It seemed simple, but it was very effective. Of course, with Genrio's cultivation, it was not difficult to see Cheng Hua's victory in this competition was mainly due to the point of winning by surprise. Presumably, his next opponent would be prepared in advance after hearing that Cheng Hua had such a strange technique, so it was basically impossible for him to catch them off guard again. He didn't know what kind of surprise Cheng Hua would bring to him in the next competition. Thinking of this, even Genrio, who had always been serious, showed a faint smile at this moment. His son had done well, and as the father he also felt proud. Immortal cultivators did not need to rest. Therefore, from the moment it started, the gathering had to continue until the end. Following this, Cheng Hua went through another 2 rounds of competition. However, the opponents in these 2 matches were weaker than the old man from before. Therefore, Cheng Hua did not spend much effort and easily defeated the 2 of them. By noon the next day, most of the weaker cultivators had been eliminated, and the competition officially entered the white-hot stage. Cheng Hua's 4th match was against a middle golden elixir stage cultivator. This middle golden elixir stage cultivator was incredible. Because he was of the direct bloodline, he even called the current family head uncle. The Xianyuan family had many members, and this person was older than Cheng Hua by 20 years, so Cheng Hua did not recognize him. Of course, Cheng Hua could not be bothered to recognize him. Speaking of which, it was strange, unknowingly, that rash and willful Xianyuan Chenghua had now become much more low-key. Therefore, in the face of this direct bloodline cultivator's provocation, Chenghua did not even have much of an emotional fluctuation. He only treated the other party as a moving sandbag that could be easily crushed. As a result, Chenghua entered the final round just like that without any suspense. The family head was not very satisfied with this result, because Chenghua had not displayed any moves other than martial arts. Moreover, he was very curious about what Chenghua had learned from Great Supreme Qin. Therefore, in order to let Chenghua display his full strength, the family head decided to play some underhanded tricks. He ordered people to replace the opponent that Chenghua was supposed to encounter and put the person who was recognized as the strongest in this meeting in front of Chenghua in advance. This person's name was Xianyuan Wuhan. He was of the direct bloodline, and his cultivation was at the peak of the golden elixir stage. However, although Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation was high, what was truly frightening about him was actually his age. Because this year he was already 33 years old. Chapter 517. Xianyuan Wuhan. Whenever this name was mentioned in the Xianyuan clan, everyone would have some impression of him, because he was already 230 years old this year. Furthermore, this was already the third time Xianyuan Wuhan had participated in the clan gathering. According to common sense, if he hadn't stepped into Yuanying when he was 200 or 300 years old, this kind of cultivation talent wasn't too bad. Yuanying wasn't that easy to condense. Many people spent their entire lives and might never be able to step over that threshold. However, Xianyuan Wuhan's situation was obviously a bit special. As a direct descendant of the Xianyuan clan, he had enjoyed unimaginable cultivation resources since he was young. Therefore, to a second-generation young master like Xianyuan Wuhan who was still stuck in the Oris core stage when he was 200 or 300 years old, this was actually a rather humiliating thing. Could it be because Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation talent was too bad? However, the truth was exactly the opposite. In fact, Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation talent, even when placed in the entire Xianyuan clan, could be considered as one of the top few. This was a genius who had fallen. How high-spirited was the Xianyuan Wuhan of the past? When he participated in the clan gathering for the first time, his radiance was as dazzling as the afternoon sun, to the extent that bystanders couldn't even look straight at him. He was like the sun and moon in the sky, anyone could only be overshadowed in front of him. Therefore, when Xianyuan Wuhan easily won the first place with his absolute tyrannical strength, everyone thought that he would be another rising star of the Xianyuan clan, even possibly becoming the next celestial lord of the Tuoba clan. However, no one would have thought that, in the following 100 years, Xianyuan Wuhan's cultivation actually didn't have the slightest bit of progress. When he participated in the clan gathering for the first time, his cultivation was already at the peak of the Oris core stage. 100 years had passed. At the start of the second clan gathering, everyone actually saw his figure on the stage again. The bystanders were shocked by Xianyuan Wuhan's stagnation, but the young talents who competed with him in the same period felt even more despair and helplessness. Why did this grandson come again? Even if Xianyuan Wuhan's performance in the second clan gathering was even more outstanding, everyone only felt that everything was to be expected. In any case, if they met him again, they would just directly admit defeat. Perhaps others could participate in the clan gathering for the second or third time. Only Xianyuan Wuhan could not. 100 years ago, Chenghua's elder brother, Genyuan Jingqi, was defeated by Xianyuan Wuhan. 100 years later, Genyuan Jingqi had already stepped into the Yuanying realm, but Xianyuan Wuhan was still stuck in the gold core realm. Instead, he used the secret method of telepathy to send it directly to Chenghua's ears. Obviously, this brother was very clear about Chenghua's background. The reason why he was willing to talk nonsense with Chenghua was actually entirely because of sovereign Qin. Chenghua was somewhat non-committal about this. It seemed like he was being looked down upon. It didn't matter. Let's see who's the real deal then. Therefore, Chenghua didn't say anything more. He directly cupped his fists and bowed to Xianyuan Wuhan. Cheng Hua, would Mr. Wuhan please enlighten me? Cheng Hua's reaction seemed to be somewhat out of Xianyuan Wuhan's expectations. Therefore, after hearing his declaration of war, a faint smile immediately appeared on Xianyuan Wuhan's face. Oh, come then. The battle suddenly started just like that. Cheng Hua's figure was like a ghost, and he instantly disappeared on the spot. Seeing that, Xianyuan Wuhan's reaction was completely different from the opponents that Cheng Hua had encountered before. He didn't take out his own magic weapon. Instead, he imitated Cheng Hua and went up to meet him with his bare hands. Both of their speeds were extremely fast. As soon as they came into contact, there was a series of bang 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 sounds of fists and feet colliding on the stage. In just a blink of an eye, the two of them had already exchanged a few blows. Although Cheng Hua had already mentally prepared himself to a certain extent before this. But at this moment, only then did he truly understand how terrifying Xianyuan Wuhan was. Even though Xianyuan Wuhan hadn't learned martial arts before, he was actually able to rely on his own rich cultivation and some shallow experience that he had accumulated from watching the battle before the competition to firmly suppress Cheng Hua. Cheng Hua's movements were very fast, but Xianyuan Wuhan was even faster than him. Cheng Hua's moves were very ingenious, but Xianyuan Wuhan was able to imitate him in the blink of an eye and return the favor in an instant. This was the true peak of Golden Elixir realm. In terms of cultivation, in terms of experience, in terms of skills, Cheng Hua was still too young. And under the suppression of such absolute strength, he was like an unlucky person who had fallen into a quagmire. The harder he struggled, the faster he sank. When Xianyuan Wuhan gradually adapted to Cheng Hua's moves and gradually figured out some tricks from them, then Cheng Hua wouldn't be far from failure. Chapter 518. In the end, the martial arts that Cheng Hua learned was actually just a gold core stage cultivation method. In the future, as Qin Xueqing's cultivation continued to improve, this cultivation method might gradually become stronger and perfect. But before that, if Cheng Hua wanted to completely defeat Xianyuan Wuhan with this imperfect martial arts cultivation method, this was tantamount to a fool's dream. Xianyuan Wuhan was really too strong. The so-called invincible in the same realm was not just a saying. Xianyuan Wuhan did not even use any magic arts, nor did he use any magic treasures. He only needed to copy and learn Cheng Hua's moves through actual combat, and he could quickly master these moves, and then use the same moves to deal with Cheng Hua. The reason was not that Xianyuan Wuhan had a unique skill of giving someone a taste of their own medicine, but because the moves that Cheng Hua used were all on the surface, so Xianyuan Wuhan could quickly learn them for his own use. Immortal techniques were from the inside out, martial arts were from the outside in. The two seemed to be poles apart, but in fact, they were different paths leading to the same goal. It was just like that old saying, the great Tao was like mercury flowing to the ground, and every grain was round. On the stage, Cheng Hua and Xianyuan Wuhan exchanged blows quickly. Below the stage, everyone cheered for Cheng Hua in unison. Since Xianyuan Wuhan was the great demon king in everyone's hearts, then Cheng Hua, who dared to fight with the great demon king, naturally became the hero in everyone's hearts. Although everyone knew that Cheng Hua would definitely fail, as long as he did not fall, the cheers below the stage would not stop for a moment. The two figures were like ghosts as they moved quickly on the stage. In just 10 minutes, the two had already exchanged no less than 200 moves. And as the two fought longer and longer, Cheng Hua also gradually showed signs of defeat. Just like a sports competition, when the skills and experience of the two sides were almost the same, physical strength became the most important deciding factor. Maintaining the protective shield consumed true essence, and every attack also consumed true essence. Cheng Hua was merely in the middle stage of the Gold Core realm. How could he fight with Xianyuan Wuhan, who was in the peak stage of the Gold Core realm for a long time? At that moment, any onlooker with a little bit of knowledge could see that Cheng Hua's defeat was inevitable. This child, he's already been forced to this point, but he's still not willing to show his true abilities. Yuan Liang, do you think he really only knows these moves, or does he have other plans in mind? The patriarch and the 8 elders were still watching the battle from the sky. After hearing the patriarch's question, Genryo fell silent. He did not respond. Chapter 5:19. With the idea of clearing Mr. Chen's name, Cheng Hua brazenly drew his sword. The 3-foot-long sword in his hand drew a semicircle in the air, and the tip of the sword pointed directly in Xianyuan Wuhan's direction. The distance between the two of them was about 20 meters. The moment Cheng Hua pointed his long sword at Xianyuan Wuhan sensed a strong murderous aura surging toward him. But what made Xianyuan Wuhan slightly surprised was, although Cheng Hua's murderous aura was strong, the long sword in his hand did not show any signs of vital essence fluctuation. It was just like a lifeless wooden stick. Xianyuan Wuhan looked at Cheng Hua with slight confusion. But then, he could not help but show a trace of seriousness on his face. No, something's wrong. Cheng Hua's murderous aura was so strong, but there was no sign of vital essence fluctuation around him. Under such circumstances, unless Cheng Hua was deliberately mystifying, this sword was definitely extraordinary. So, Xianyuan Wuhan immediately mobilized his vital essence and surrounded himself in it. At the same time, Cheng Hua had also finished accumulating power and raised his hand to wave the long sword in his hand. "Mr. Wuhan, please enlighten me." Cheng Hua roared fiercely, and the long sword in his hand suddenly bloomed with a dazzling light. Before the sword was drawn, the sword chi became one, hidden but not released. The sword momentum was released. In an instant, like a long river hanging upside down, it soared into the sky and into the clouds. Wherever the sword light went, it could be said that heaven and earth lost their color, and the sun and moon turned away in shame. The ultimate sword was only for a moment of youth. Just as Cheng Hua waved this sword, the family head, who had been watching the battle in the air, suddenly changed his expression. This sword, why was it so similar to the rumors? As one of the 3 major families in Ningzhou, the Xianyuan family was naturally very concerned about the Tuoba family's change. There were rumors that the reason why Tuoba Yi was seriously injured and had to escape to death was because he was hit by Mr. Chen's sword. One had to know that Tuoba Yi was an Empyrean-level existence. But he couldn't even take one hit from Mr. Chen. Such a strange situation, just thinking about it made one's hair stand on end. After all, the outside world didn't know what exactly happened at that time, so it was inevitable that everyone would speculate too much about this incident. As the person involved in the incident, Tuoba Yi had been recuperating in seclusion. As for Taoist Master Void Pure Stage, due to his identity, it was impossible for him to personally appear and refute the rumors. This also caused the rumors to become more and more outrageous. Many people were even guessing whether Qin Shi had already touched the threshold of the semi-sage realm. Otherwise, how could he explain his magnificent feat of fighting against 4 opponents in the Jade Pure Cave Heaven? Since Mr. Chen was so powerful, as his direct disciple, Cheng Hua should have learned something, right? The patriarch had high hopes for Cheng Hua, so he sent Xianyuan Wuhan to test Cheng Hua. The result was just as the patriarch had hoped. Cheng Hua was successfully enraged by Xianyuan Wuhan. Thus, he no longer held back, and his first move was a killing move. It was like pressing the shutter of a camera. As a strong light flashed, time suddenly stopped. Everyone felt their minds go blank. By the time they came back to their senses, Xianyuan Wuhan's tall and sturdy body that couldn't be considered to have landed directly flew backwards. Accompanied by a strong gust of wind, Xianyuan Wuhan fell heavily to the ground. Puff! There were no obvious wounds on Xianyuan Wuhan's body, but the violent impact still caused him some internal injuries, so he couldn't help but cough up a mouthful of blood. Cheng Hua won? Looking at Xianyuan Wuhan, who fell heavily to the ground, everyone suddenly felt like they were dreaming. Are you satisfied now? This is a sword move that Mr. Chen taught me. However, Cheng Hua's aptitude is too low and he can't master the trick, so he can only barely make a pose. In fact, that sword move just now had exhausted all of Cheng Hua's vital essence, But in order to protect Mr. Chen's supreme reputation, Cheng Hua could only hold on to his last breath and pretended to be calm as he declared this victory declaration. After saying that, Cheng Hua turned around and left very confidently. Looking at his back as he left, a thoughtful expression suddenly appeared on Xianyuan Wuhan's face. From the moment Cheng Hua waved the long sword in his hand, winning or losing this competition was no longer important. He not only proved himself, but also indirectly defended Mr. Chen's reputation. This sword move was indeed very powerful. But with the cultivation of the patriarch and the 8 elders, how could they not see that Cheng Hua was already an arrow at the end of its flight at that time? Although Xianyuan Wuhan suffered internal injuries, he still had the ability to get up and fight again. Therefore, if they continued to fight, Cheng Hua might not even be able to take one move from Xianyuan Wuhan. However, this was only an internal competition within the family after all. Since Cheng Hua waved this sword move, then no matter what the result was, the patriarch would definitely guarantee that he would be in the top 3. In fact, when Cheng Hua showed that sword move, even the patriarch, who was watching the battle, could not help but be a little tempted. If he were to use such a miraculous sword technique, what kind of power would it display? Thinking of this, the patriarch could not help but want Cheng Hua to hand over the sword technique. However, due to Mr. Chen's illustrious reputation, he could only suppress this greed in his heart and ask Cheng Hua indirectly. However, Cheng Hua was not stupid. No matter how the patriarch probed, his response was always only one word, which was, sword 1. It was neither the one sword concealing emptiness nor the great Qian Yuan. It was a set of sword techniques that Qin Shi created himself after hundreds of years of deliberation and deduction in the dark space after breaking through to the insightful emptiness realm. Because this set of sword techniques had been created not long ago and still needed to be perfected, Qin Shi passed the first move to Cheng Hua and Yi Ji, only hoping to find more loopholes from them. Their cultivation was not high, so it was easier to see the problem when they used it. There were always risks in doing experiments, right? They were lucky that there were no problems. Therefore, when Qin Shi passed on sword 1 to them, he did not forget to repeatedly emphasize the risks involved. But the two of them were good. Not only were they not worried about whether they would be possessed by the devil, but they were diligently practicing every day, wishing that they could grasp this move in one go. In Qin Shi's eyes, the two of them were experimental white mice. But in the eyes of others, the appearance of Sword 1 confirmed their identity as the supreme martial artist's disciples. Therefore, it had to be said that this was really a beautiful misunderstanding. Throughout Qin Shi's life, the cultivation techniques he learned were all the top cultivation techniques in the world. First, there was the 49 styles of heaven evolution, then there was the Xian Tian Evil Emperor's saber and sword dual arts, and then there were the various treasured scriptures of the divine sect. As long as Qin Shi could think of a cultivation technique, it was basically included in it. Could it be that Qin Shi had nothing to do, so he wanted to create a set of cultivation techniques to play with? Of course, things were not that simple. Qin Shi seemed to be creating his own cultivation technique, but in fact, he was refining what he had learned in his life. Just like the sentence he taught Cheng Hua, the most suitable for oneself was the best. Whether it was magic treasures or cultivation techniques, in fact, it was the same principle. At the insightful emptiness realm, the experience of predecessors could only be used as a reference. In the future, Qin Shi still needed to walk down the road by himself. Rough iron ore could no longer meet the needs of the insightful emptiness realm, so Qin Shi needed to smelt these iron ore until it was refined into steel, then he could continue to use it. Qin Shi personally leaned toward sword techniques. Thus, he used the Moonlight Sword technique and Dark Valley Sword technique as the foundation to create a new cultivation technique that belonged to him. His pair of eagle-like eyes were even more unbridled as they scanned the surroundings. With his current nervous appearance, those who didn't know better would probably think that he was transporting banknotes. By daddy, by mommy. Unlike Qin Shi's vigilance, the little fellow behaved as usual, as if yesterday's love letter incident did not put too much of a psychological burden on her. Therefore, after she smiled and waved goodbye to her parents, she ran into the school gate like a wisp of smoke. As the class monitor, she naturally had to set an example. Therefore, she had to be the first to sit in the classroom before her classmates arrived. Nian Nian had already woken up early enough, but there were still many children in the class who woke up earlier than her. It was not that these children were more diligent than her, but because most of these children lived far away, coupled with the fact that the morning rush hour in Shangjing was too congested, their parents had no choice but to send their children to school early every day and then rush to work. Living in Shangjing was really not easy. How could a rich second generation, like Nian Nian, understand the hardships? As usual, when Nian Nian arrived at the classroom, there were already a lot of people sitting sparsely in the classroom. Some children gathered together and chatted about games, while others chased and played at the back of the classroom. Not sure who shouted, "Class monitor is here," but a few mischievous children stopped what they were doing and returned to their seats. Looking at this situation, Nian Nian, the class monitor, was almost synonymous with the teacher. Nian Nian was very satisfied with the self-awareness of her classmates, so she went back to her seat. Because of yesterday's love letter incident, she did not immediately take out her textbook after putting down her bag. Instead, she bent down and looked at her drawer. Sure enough, there was another thing that did not belong to her. It was a piece of chocolate. Because Cheng Hua and Yiji loved to eat chocolate, Nian Nian also ate a lot with them, so she could be considered as knowledgeable. This type of chocolate was very common in the supermarket, called Ferrero. Usually, there were 3 in a box, and a box cost 9 yuan. For adults, 9 yuan was naturally nothing, not to mention that there was only one here, and it did not even have a complete packaging. But for elementary school students who did not have much pocket money, Ferrero's status was far above spicy sticks and potato chips. After all, he only bought one for 3 yuan. You could only eat 1 bite each. From this, it could be seen that this anonymous confessor's feelings for Nian Nian could be considered true love. The moment Nian Nian saw the chocolate, she could not help but hesitate for a moment, then she took it out of the drawer. Regardless of who gave her this piece of chocolate, she would never eat it. Because, whether it was Qin Shi or Aunt Zhang, both of them had taught her not to eat things given by others. Therefore, Nian Nian did not even bat an eyelid. She took the chocolate, turned around, and walked directly to the trash can at the back of the classroom. Children who were arranged to sit next to the trash can by the teacher were usually the most mischievous children in the class. Therefore, when this child saw Nian Nian throw the chocolate into the trash can, his eyes immediately lit up. "This is chocolate. Class monitor, you don't want it. Then I'll take it." This kid was very mischievous. He had already noticed that Nian Nian was holding Ferrero's chocolate. The trash can had to be cleaned every afternoon, so the moment this golden chocolate fell into the trash can, this kid very quickly picked it up. "It's delicious." This child's name was Li Sanduo. His name was given casually, and so was his personality. He did not mind that the chocolate was picked up from the trash can at all. He tore open the packaging and ate it happily. Nian Nian saw that he had picked up the chocolate and was about to return to her seat. At this moment, Li Sanduo suddenly called out to her. "Class monitor, if there's more good food in the future, don't throw it away, give it to me, I'll help you eat, okay?" Chapter 521. Speaking of which, Li Sanduo was actually quite interesting. He wasn't tall, about half a head shorter than Nian Nian, so he was one of the shortest in the class. Even so, this kid relied on his usual outstanding performance to get the teacher to arrange him in the last row, near the trash can at the back door. From this, it could be seen how mischievous this kid was in the teacher's eyes. Li Sanduo was indeed very mischievous. However, his mischievousness was very different from other children. Perhaps it was because of his more antisocial personality. Li Sanduo didn't have many friends in class, so when he had nothing to do, he would be alone in the last row, fiddling with something. Li Sanduo never played around with his classmates, nor did he like to bully others, but he had a very bad habit that the teacher disliked, and that was that he liked to interrupt during class. Just like a comedian, no matter what the teacher said on stage, he would always be the first to respond, and then make the whole class burst into laughter. In any case, he was a third-grade student, but he always pretended to be stupid in class, deliberately disrupting the class discipline, so the teacher naturally disliked him. They weren't afraid of students being mischievous, but they were afraid of students being unreasonable. Obviously, Lee San-duo belonged to the latter. It was unknown where this habit of his came from. After repeatedly failing to change, the teacher completely lost patience with him. One must know that this was the capital's affiliated primary school, and the teacher's shoulders carried a lot of pressure. The third grade was a very important turning point. Lee San-duo didn't like to study, but he actually wanted to affect others' studies. How could the teacher tolerate this? Therefore, the teacher simply moved him to the last row, so that he wouldn't affect the other students. This was a warning. Lee San-duo didn't necessarily understand, but his parents definitely understood. If he continued to mess around like this, it wouldn't be a matter of changing seats, but a matter of persuading him to transfer schools. A weirdo like Lee San-duo wasn't very common. Although Nian didn't like him interrupting the teacher in class, that was another matter. Nian didn't hate him because of that. Therefore, after hearing Lee San-duo's words, Nian turned to look at him, and then began to think seriously. Economy is a virtue. Wasn't there a famous quote hanging on the classroom wall? Anyway, it would be a waste to throw it away. If Lee San-duo wanted to eat it, then let him have it. All right. Thank you, class leader. Lee San-duo seemed to know who put the chocolate in Nian's drawer, so when he saw Nian nod in agreement, his face showed a very happy smile. Oh yeah. Now, he would have chocolate to eat every day. The result was just as Lee San-duo had expected. Chapter 522. Although Nian didn't understand the specific meaning of the 8 words, eliminate evil and defend justice, for the time being, this didn't stop her from having a warm-hearted heart that loved to fight for justice. Just like what her father usually taught her, regardless of status, background, knowledge, or upbringing, people need to respect each other. It was obvious that bullying others was a form of disrespect. Regardless of whether it was her or others who were bullied, Nian would never allow such things to happen around her. Therefore, after confirming that Lee San-duo was bullied, Nian immediately took out her position as the class monitor and fiercely wanted to fight for justice for Lee San-duo. Tell me, who bullied you? Perhaps because she was angry, Nian's words were powerful and resonating. Her voice was very loud and instantly attracted the attention of the other students. In a moment, Lee San-duo, who was forcefully dragged out of his seat by Nian, became the focus of everyone's attention. According to Lee San-duo's personality, he definitely wouldn't care about how others looked at him. In fact, he might even be proud of himself. But Lee San-duo didn't know what was wrong with him today, but when he realized that the other students were looking at him, his face suddenly flushed red. Following that, he shouted at Nian with an agitated face, "It's none of your business. Go away." As he said that, he struggled with all his might, as if he wanted to break free from Nian's grip. Seeing Lee San-duo's extreme reaction, Nian could only resentfully withdraw her hand. Lee San-duo. Nian originally wanted to persuade him, but this Lee San-duo seemed to have eaten gunpowder. Not only did he not accept Nian's concern, he even straightened his neck and shouted at her, "Go away. It's none of your business. What does it have to do with you?" Annoying. Since he had already said that, Nian naturally couldn't say anything more. She could only helplessly turn around and return to her seat. What did it mean to grieve for misfortune and be angry for failure to fight? That was it. Compared to high school, school bullying was actually more common in elementary and middle school. The so-called school bullying was actually bullying other students through beating, insulting, and mocking. There were 2 types of people who were the easiest to bully. One type was introverted and cowardly. Even if they were bullied, they would endure it out of fear and thus be bullied for a long time. The other type was those who were flamboyant and liked to show off their uniqueness. Children with this type of character wouldn't care about other people's feelings and would easily attract the attention of the bullies. Lee San-duo obviously belonged to this type of bully. What was important to note here was that bullies were usually members of a small group. Chapter 523. With a firm resolve to uphold justice, the little fellow woke up early in the morning, which was a rare occurrence. When the father and daughter took a taxi to school, they arrived almost an hour earlier than usual. The capital-affiliated elementary school did not have a boarding school. Even though it was still early in the morning, the school gate was already bustling with activity. As a parent, Chen Shi naturally could not instigate Nian Nian to fight. Regardless of whether he could win or not, fighting was definitely wrong. Thus, when he saw the little girl's excited face, Chen Shi smiled and reminded her. However, it was just a reminder. From the beginning to the end, Chen Shi had no intention of interfering in this matter. As long as Nian Nian's starting point was correct, no matter what she wanted to do, as a father, he would support her with both hands and feet. School bullying, in fact, was just school violence. Many children were weak and did not dare to tell their teachers and parents even if they were bullied. Thus, once bullying occurred, it would usually last for a long time. Those who had not experienced such an incident would find it difficult to understand the despair and helplessness of the victims. Fear, helplessness, and panic. It was like a nightmare that pressured them to the point of suffocation, but the teachers and parents did not notice at all. They did not even dare to look at the bully. As long as the bully appeared in front of them, they would lower their heads and become silent dogs that only knew how to wag their tails and beg for mercy. This kind of thing was unavoidable. It was like a steel wire that was tied up and gradually tightened around the victim's heart. They were in pain, but they could not make a sound. Lu Sun once said, "If you do not explode in silence, you will perish in silence." There was a limit to everything. If Nian Nian was willing to stand up and stop it, Chen Shi would not let her stand aside and be a bystander. "Dad, don't worry. I won't fight with them. I just want to stop them from bullying Lee San-duo." Adhering to the responsibility and awareness of being the class leader, the little girl waved goodbye to Chen Shi in high spirits, and then ran with big strides towards the teaching building. In the future, she would be the first to reach the classroom. Nian Nian's classroom was on the 3rd floor. When she rushed to the classroom, there were already 2 or 3 students sitting in the classroom. She glanced at the back of the classroom and saw that Lee San-duo was not there yet. Thus, she returned to her seat and habitually looked at her drawer. Fortunately, there was no chocolate. It was still early, and even the teacher hadn't arrived at school yet, so after waiting for a while, Nian Nian temporarily put these distracting thoughts behind her. She took out the textbook and began to review it seriously. In fact, she was not sure if Lee San-duo would be bullied today. However, it was best if it did not happen. The only thing she could do was to stand up and stop the bullying as soon as it happened again. Nian Nian was to study. As time passed, there were more and more people in the classroom. Perhaps it was because Nian Nian had come too early today, so the children who usually liked to chase and play at the back of the classroom didn't make a fuss today for the first time. Instead, they sat obediently in their seats as soon as they entered the classroom. Taking advantage of the fact that class had not started yet, many students started to chat in low voices. But at this moment, a piercing cat's cry suddenly came from outside the window. Meow! Meow meow meow. After hearing this familiar voice, Nian Nian immediately looked out the window. She saw the big cat lying on a tree branch and staring at the little girl with its faintly glowing eyes. When Nian Nian noticed it, the big cat gently wagged its tail and quietly jumped to another tree branch. Nian Nian understood what it meant. So, without thinking, she stood up and quickly ran out of the classroom. The big cat moved around the tree while Nian Nian chased after it in the corridor. When she ran into a classroom in the corner, the big cat finally stopped. There was a situation here. Nian Nian looked up at the door sign and realized that she was in the music classroom. The door of the classroom was tightly shut. Nian Nian subconsciously pressed her ear against the door and listened. She immediately heard some movement from within. There was someone inside. The big cat never did anything meaningless. Since it spoke, it meant that something must have happened. Hence, Nian Nian didn't think too much about it and tried to twist the doorknob. The door was not locked. Nian Nian pushed the door open and went in. At this moment she suddenly realized. In this half-empty music classroom, there were 6 or 7 people standing there. Seeing this, Nian Nian could not help but be stunned. She glanced at the people in front of her and saw a familiar figure. She could not help but ask, "Lee Sanduo? Why are you here?" There were 7 people in the classroom. Lee Sanduo was alone in the corner of the back door. The other 6 people were in a semicircle, surrounding him. Nian Nian's sudden appearance seemed to have frightened these mischievous bullies. Hence, when they heard her voice, the children who were originally facing away from her all turned to look at her in unison. The situation was awkward. Nian Nian and these people stared at each other. After a few seconds of silence, one of the people who seemed to be the leader reacted. He quickly whispered to his companions, "Let's go." This person was tall and muscular. He looked like he was at least a 6th grade student. Perhaps it was because he was older, but to Nian Nian, this guy looked ferocious. She was stunned on the spot. There were no instruments in the music classroom, so the door was not locked. Both of its ears trembled slightly, and its tensed body immediately relaxed. Then, it returned to its soft and feeble state. Meow. The big cat obediently laid back down, as if nothing had happened. The children had no idea that they had just walked through the gates of hell. Because of the seal in her body, even though Nian Nian had already started cultivating, the strength of her body did not change much. Therefore, after being pushed hard by the leader of the children, Nian Nian immediately staggered and leaned against the railing of the corridor. From the beginning to the end, the leader of the children did not take her seriously. But he did not expect. After being pushed away, Nian Nian immediately went forward and grabbed his arm, then shouted angrily, "You're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to leave." This completely angered the other party. After all, he was a 6th grade student. Facing Nian Nian, who had skipped a grade to become a 3rd grade, he naturally had an absolute advantage in terms of physical strength. So, he immediately grabbed Nian Nian's wrist and used all his strength to twist her fingers. "Let go. Believe it or not, I'll beat you up. Get out of my way." An absurd farce was suddenly staged. Nian Nian held on tightly to the person's arm, and the leader of the children struggled with all his might. After a few seconds of entanglement, the other party suddenly lost his patience. So, he no longer cared about gender differences and raised his leg to kick Nian Nian. Seeing this, the big cat could only helplessly close its eyes. It had no choice. She did not allow it to interfere. Bang! The big cat did not stop him, and Nian Nian's calf suffered a heavy kick. This was great. Nian Nian was completely angered by the other party's actions. Do you still remember what Daddy said? We don't bully others, but we definitely can't let others bully us. So, she immediately copied the other party, raised her right leg, and without a word, kicked over. Moreover, her kick was even more ruthless and decisive than the other party's. After being kicked by her, the expression on the leader's face was very interesting. "You still dare to fight back? Brothers, beat her up for me." The other children had some reservations, but after seeing that Nian Nian dared to fight back, they swarmed over. They wanted to gang up on Nian Nian, just like when they ganged up on others in the past. Meow. The big cat could not bear to watch any longer. But just as it stood up again and was about to jump over to interfere, a thin figure suddenly rushed out from the front door. Crack. A crisp sound was heard, and everyone, including Nian Nian, could not help but turn to look. It was Lee Sanduo. After seeing that Nian Nian was being ganged up on, this kid suddenly had the courage to pick up a plastic broom and hit the back of one of the children who was standing there. After saying this, Nian was still a little afraid that the principal would not believe her, so she told him about the love letter and chocolate that she received previously. Now this was great. After hearing Nian's story, the child's little face flushed red all the way to his ears. He was so embarrassed that he did not even dare to raise his head. "What's your name?" The principal was not asking Nian, but the unlucky one who had a crush on her. My name is Zhu Xingyu. Which class are you from?" "Third year, class 1. At that moment, the principal suddenly understood the entire situation. Thus, after waving his hand to let Nian and Li Sanduo leave first, the principal turned his head to look at Zhu Xingyu calmly and said, "Zhu Xingyu, right? Come here for a moment. There's a phone here. Do you know your parents' phone number? Come, give them a call." After hearing the principal's words, the child named Zhu Xingyu immediately burst into tears. It was obvious that this child knew what it meant to call his parents. However, all of this had nothing to do with Nian anymore. Li Sanduo and Nian walked out of the principal's office side by side. At this time, class had already started, so the entire school returned to its usual tranquility. The two of them were silent. Li Sanduo suddenly thought of something, then he said to Nian with a serious face, "Thank you." This time, Li Sanduo did not call Nian class monitor in a sarcastic manner. Instead, he called her name seriously. "Chen Yan." The weather in Shangjing gradually became hot. The tea house welcomed the peak season again, but unfortunately, its owner was no longer in the mood to run it. Because of this, Gu Lao had to make a special trip to the Sai courtyard to drink tea with Qin Shi under the old locust tree. The two played chess and chatted. Their days were particularly comfortable. The life of a retired veteran was probably like this. Early in the morning, Chen Shi sent Nian to school. Not long after returning to the courtyard, there was a rush of knocking outside the courtyard. He thought that Gu Lao was here to drink tea again, so he opened the door with a smile on his face. But what Chen Shi didn't expect was, when he opened the door, it wasn't Gu Lao who appeared in front of him, but a man and a woman. Chen Shi knew these two people. The man was called Xiao Wang, and the woman was called Xiao Lu. The two belonged to the Wulian inspection office and were responsible for monitoring him. The year before last, at the request of Qin Yongwang, they delivered a car to his family. What's the matter? Chen Shi wasn't a voyeur, so under normal circumstances, he didn't release his divine sense to pay attention to the situation around him. After all, he lived in the capital of the country and in the most central part of the city. Naturally, he didn't have to worry too much about safety. Anyway, as long as no one broke into the courtyard, Chen Shi didn't care. "Mr. Chen, it's like this." Seeing that Chen Shi's attitude was still mild, the young man called Xiao Wang hesitated for a moment before he said, "We just received an emergency report that someone may cause trouble on Chang'an Street tomorrow. Hohai is not far from Chang'an Street. The leader is worried that if there is an accident, it may affect you. So, he asked us to inform you in advance so that you can prepare in advance." After hearing what Xiao Wang said, Chen Shi was instantly amused. Wang Chuanju's arrangement was a bit interesting. What was Chang'an Street? The first street of Huaxia. Not only was there the Forbidden City and Tiananmen Square on this street, but there was also Zongnanhai and the Great Hall of the People. Who would dare to cause trouble in such a place? They must have eaten too much, right? Chen Shi subconsciously felt that this matter was a bit ridiculous. After he pondered for a moment, he suddenly realized the deeper meaning of it. It turned out that Wang Chuanju was giving him a heads-up. Since Wu Lian had already sent someone to inform him, it meant that this matter wasn't groundless. Something big was going to happen tomorrow. After all, things were not the same as before. Now that the internet was so advanced, once something happened on Chang'an Street, it would spread throughout the country and even the world in an instant. How embarrassing would that be? It would be embarrassing for the whole country. Chapter 528. Chen Shi was very curious about what would happen tomorrow, so he asked Xiaowang in detail. But no matter how he probed, Xiaowang refused to reveal any details. He didn't know if he really didn't have enough authority, or Wang Chuanju deliberately told him not to say anything. In short, no matter what the truth was, Chen Shi's curiosity was successfully aroused by Xiaowang. It was said that within 10 years, Huaxia would have a total of 96 new types of frigates, including aircraft carriers, and officially enter the naval establishment. Under such circumstances, there were still people who dared to make trouble on Chang and Street. It had to be said that they were really courageous. As an outstanding young man of the new era who grew up singing, "I love Beijing's Tiananmen Square, the sun rises on Tiananmen Square," as long as Chen Shi thought about what might happen tomorrow on Chang and Street, he really wanted to immediately move a small stool to the front row to occupy a good seat. This was a very pure family plot, and it had nothing to do with personal experience. As long as one was not born rebellious, one would have a special feeling for the homeland that raised them. Homeland, homeland, homeland. That was the meaning. Of course, with Chen Shi's current cultivation, he could basically be regarded as a god who lived on Earth. Gods would not intervene in the affairs of the mortal world, but they would always pay attention to every move in the mortal world. And this kind of behavior that clearly had the ability to intervene, but chose to stay out of it to watch the fun, was often said to be eating melons. Just like the little girl who watched the trailer of a certain animated movie, after watching the trailer, she would naturally wait in front of the TV on time, only hoping that the movie was more exciting than the trailer. Chen Shi was such a qualified melon eater now. Therefore, early the next morning, after Chen Shi sent Nian Yan to school again, he directly released his divine sense. From Jiangguimen to Fuxing Gate in the west. With Tiananmen Square as the center, any movement within a radius of 10 kilometers was under his control. Xiaowang did not lie to him. On this day, the Forbidden City was still open to the public, but the security forces on Tiananmen Square were obviously more than usual. It could be said that there was a sentry every 3 steps and a sentry every 5 steps. In addition to these guards on the surface, there were also many plainclothes people disguised as tourists wandering around the square. On the surface, everything was as usual, but secretly, they were jittery and paranoid. It's a bit interesting, even snipers are here? Chen Shi returned to the courtyard, but his attention was always on Chang and Street. In addition to a few snipers hidden on the viewing platform, there were 3 buses with travel agency signboards parked not far from the flag stand. Let me see. They could not bring their phones on duty, so one of them raised his wrist and looked at it, then replied, "It's already 4:30 in the blink of an eye." 4:30? The Forbidden City is about to close. Just as the two of them were busy lamenting the passing of time, an extremely sharp whistle suddenly sounded not far away. Whoosh! Those who did not know would think that it was the red armband at the traffic light intersection directing traffic, but after the two of them heard it, they immediately jumped out of the car as if they had received some kind of order. Quick! Set up the cordon! The whistle was the secret signal for this operation. Since the whistle sounded, it meant that the troublemakers had shown up. Just as expected. Just as the police were busy setting up the cordon and sealing off the square, the martial artists on the 3 buses also rushed out of the cars. When was the Forbidden City the most crowded? It was when it opened in the morning and when it closed in the afternoon. Therefore, after the whistle sounded, all the Wulian action personnel went against the flow of people and swarmed toward Tiananmen. At the same time, a tour group of about 30 to 40 people walked out of the entrance of the scenic area under the guidance of the tour guide. It's them, take them down. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.